Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. Normally, we would have explanation about our Spanish interpretation, but they're running just a few minutes late, so they'll just go into Spanish interpretation when they become available. Now I'll do our land acknowledgement. The City of South Lake Tahoe acknowledges the lands we occupy today are the lands and home of the Washishu, the people from here known today as the Washoe tribe of Nevada and California, a sovereign nation. Since the beginning of time and for thousands of years before the arrival of any other people, the Washoe lived here and cared for this place with values and intention that we can all learn from. On behalf of the City Council, I would like to acknowledge, thank, and honor the indigenous Washoe tribal communities that are the past, present, and future stewards of the Lake Tahoe Basin. If everyone would please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, Madam City Clerk, would you please do roll call?
Of course. Councilmember Roberts. Oh.
Present.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Here.
Councilmember Robbins.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Bass.
Here.
Mayor Wallace.
Here.
All present.
Thank you. Ms. City Attorney, do you have a closed session report?
Yes, Madam Mayor, we did not have a closed session this evening, but I do have an item to report out from our closed session on January 14th, 2025. It was regarding existing litigation on a workers' comp appeals board case, several cases involving former police sergeant Jason Chaney. Since that meeting, we have reached a final settlement by compromise and release on those workers' comp claims for the amount of $234,692. And it was a vote of 4-0 in favor, with Mayor Pro Tem Bass absent.
Thank you, Ms. Stroud. Okay, moving on. We'll start with our proclamations. We have two proclamations tonight. One is for National Human Trafficking Prevention Month, and the other is National Stalking Awareness Month. And we are going to start with Cheyenne Lane from Tahoe Youth and Family Services. The City of South Lake Tahoe proclamation for National Human Trafficking Prevention Month. Whereas human trafficking is a public health issue and crime connected to many other forms of violence and exploitation, and often shares common risks and protection factors such as a lack of resources, unsafe environments that harm the health and well-being of individuals, families, and communities, often across generations, with South Lake Tahoe being no exception. Whereas human trafficking can happen to anyone, but specific populations are at greater risk, including people affected by abuse, violence, poverty, youth homelessness, or social disconnection, as well as those systematically marginalized and underserved. Whereas strengthening communities requires collective action to reduce the conditions that contribute to exploitation, build resilience, and create environments where people are protected from human trafficking. Whereas connecting the dots, strengthening communities, preventing trafficking underscores the need to understand how human trafficking relates to other forms of violence and how we can prevent it by strengthening protective factors at the individual, community, and societal levels. Whereas increased community education on how to identify victims of human trafficking, along with increased knowledge of local resources and services for those affected by criminal actions, can help restore freedom and dignity to unidentified survivors, as well as help diminish the number of future victims. Now, therefore, the City of South Lake Tahoe, City Council of the City of South Lake Tahoe hereby proclaimed January 2025 as National Human Trafficking Prevention Month, along with Tahoe Youth and Family Services, reaffirming our commitment to connecting the dots, strengthening communities, preventing trafficking by increasing awareness and improved education on human trafficking to prevent and combat human trafficking in our community. Thank you. Shan. Do you want to say anything?
Well, I do actually. So our street outreach program is a federally funded program. And as many of you know, if you watched the news today, we had a freeze on government funding for all grants, loans, financial assistance. But not only does our street outreach program prevent young people becoming victims of human trafficking, we provide the necessities, such as food, clothing, and shelter, which prevent kids from becoming trafficked. There's 47% of youth that get trafficked do so because people will provide them with the food, clothing, and shelter they need just for sex, basically. And so if we as a community can do that and we can prevent our youth from getting exploited because of that, then we need to do that. So I'm really happy there was a pause on this freeze, but we do need to reach out to our Congress people and make sure that we can continue to provide these necessary programs in our community, because it's going to be detrimental if we don't. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lane. Next, we have Live Violence Free. Is Heather or Cheyenne here? You're Heather. Hi, Heather. Hi. So this is our proclamation recognizing January 2025 as National Stalking Awareness Month. Whereas across the United States, under the laws of all 50 states, the U.S. territories, and the District of Columbia and the federal government, stalking is a crime. Whereas 13.5 million people are stalked in a one-year period. Whereas the majority of victims are stalked by someone they know. Whereas 3 in 4 women killed by an intimate partner have been stalked by that partner. Whereas stalking victims experience higher rates of chronic pain, frequent headaches, sleeping difficulties, issues with vision, and asthma than the general population. Whereas more victims are stalked using technology, such as phone calls, text messages, social media platforms, internet posts, email, and electronic tracking, than not using technology. Whereas victims stalked using technology are just as concerned for their safety as victims stalked in person. Whereas there is a need for greater public awareness about the nature, criminality, and potential lethality of stalking. Whereas laws and public policies must be continually adapted to keep pace with new tactics and technologies used by stalkers. Whereas communities can better address stalking by adopting multidisciplinary responses with teams of local agencies and organizations, and by providing more and better stalking victim services. Whereas the City of South Lake Tahoe is joining forces with victim service providers, criminal and civil justice officials, and concerned citizens across the United States and throughout to observe Stalking Awareness Month. Now therefore be it resolved that the City of South Lake Tahoe City Council does hereby proclaim January 2025 as Stalking Awareness Month in South Lake Tahoe, and applaud the efforts of the many victim service providers, law enforcement officers, prosecutors, national and community organizations, and private sector supporters for their efforts in promoting awareness about stalking. Thank you. Would you like to say something?
I would just like to say that there is an intersection between human trafficking and stalking and the services that we provide at Live Violence Free. We're so lucky to be able to collaborate with Tahoe Youth and Family and then with us, because we see when there's more prevention and education in the beginning that we have less victimization, and stalking can lead to human trafficking, right? You're being stalked, you're vulnerable, and the same way human trafficking victims are stalked. So yeah, thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you. Okay. Moving on. We are going to public communications. This is the public's opportunity to speak on any topic not listed on this agenda. Comments shall be limited to 4 minutes. In accordance with the Brown Act, the City Council cannot deliberate or vote on any matter raised under public communications, but may briefly respond to statements made or questions posed. Is there anyone in the room that would like to make public comment? Mr. Wallace.
Thank you, Your Honor, and City Council. Dwayne Wallace, CEO of South Tahoe Chamber of Commerce. Wanted to give you a brief update on the offer that the two chambers made at the last meeting regarding fire protection for our community that Councilman Jenkins had brought up. We are moving very well. We really have no roadblocks to being able to put on a good, solid community forum, except for the fires in LA have some of the fire crews delayed, and some of the state and federal officials that we need may not be able to be here on the time frame we have. However, we're already working on the moderator, which agencies are going to be involved. Everybody has said yes. They're just saying we got a little bit of a time crunch, but we're going to get it done probably sooner than the council could because of the way the agendas work. And we're really excited to find out everything that the community has done. Some of the agencies, of course, would be SDPUD. They've done so much to upgrade the water system, Forest Service, Conservancy, city, of course, counties. Everybody's going to be involved. But some of the officials we need are a little bit preoccupied for obvious reasons. So it's good news. It's moving forward. And there's a lot done in each of the neighborhoods. And we're going to do the best we can to harden our defenses against fire. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. Is there anyone else in the room that would like to speak? Please come forward.
Good evening, council members. For record, my name is Deepak Sharma. My family owns and operates multiple lodging properties in South Lake Tahoe. I was told that as an atomic family, we own and operate the largest number of legal tourist accommodation units in South Lake Tahoe and in the basin. We are further in process of developing land in another commercial town center of South Lake Tahoe. For someone who is 100% invested in South Lake Tahoe, we watch the local politics very carefully. This town has never been a capitalist town. It has always been hard to survive in this town as a business. While we can praise the natural environment we live in, it is a tough place to do business. With tourism being the only industry here, and for that matter, the whole basin, we don't seem to like our tourists that much. Departure of snow globe from South Lake Tahoe is a prime example of it. That was pretty much the only event in this town that brought in tens of thousands of tourists. All those tourists came here to spend their money and effectively pay our bills. The city did its best to push them out. Several years later, we have no similar event here. Instead of harnessing the power of tourism to benefit the community here, we try to find ways to not welcome tourists. All that when all of our bills are either directly or indirectly paid by tourism industry. There is absolute no other industry in this region. Even the rec center is being built by additional 2% tax paid by tourists, already being paid for last several years, and it is earmarked for decades to come. We used to be a socialist type of town, went too far to becoming a welfare state where local government thought they can handle, control our lives, starting from what we make as a minimum wage to what should be our cost of living. While the businesses here are struggling, attempts were made to force a highly unsustainable minimum wage on the local businesses. Those elements pride themselves on a housing project that costs 5 to 6 times more to build than the options available in the open market. All this was not enough. Then we see rise of communist elements here. Communism, the very definition is people who don't respect private property. They don't respect private property rights. That is the very, very core of communism, and we saw that here in the council and the commissions appointed by this council. Measure T came along a few years back that was supposed to be supported by voters, and it said no commercial use in residential areas. And that is basically a simple enforcement of residential zoning, which says residential zoning is only for residents, no business there. So business was supposed to be focused only in the commercial areas and town centers, and that's what is the zoning laws, as well as the Measure T said that. However, in recent times, the commissions appointed by this and the previous council, there were attempts to ban commercial use of land, private land, in commercial areas of town centers. Private land, nothing to do with city government. It's not owned by public. Some smart community, People in the Planning Commission came up with ideas on how to grab private commercial land in town centers to further their communist agenda. They tried to ban commercial use of commercial land, private land. For most part, none of these people have anything to do with the tourism industry in this town. They absolutely know nothing about it, don't contribute. We are glad to see that communist elements were defeated in the past, but the danger of such elements resurfacing remains, and we need to keep a watchful eye on this matter. I'm here to warn that some of the fragments of politics here in South Lake Tahoe are taking away South Lake Tahoe from USA and making it closer to Cuba. Cuba is not where we want to be. We strongly oppose those communist elements in this council and in all the commissions appointed by the previous councils and even endorsed by the current council. I request the council to very carefully vet the commissions on their communist ideology and their connection to any local economy contribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Swarma. Is there anyone else in the room that would like to speak? Ms. Soderson?
Good evening, City Council and staff. Melissa Soderson, South Lake Tahoe. First, I'd like to thank Councilmember Jenkins for his continued focus on wildfire preparedness. However, I do also agree with the rest of Council that we do not need our more hurried implementations and knee-jerk reactions. I am curious as to how you can see our home hardening efforts as being sufficient and are choosing to focus on so-called thinning of public lands. It is true that our community does an excellent job of educating residents on the importance of fire-wise communities. However, what is lacking is not education, but rather enough grant funding to implement these programs at a community-wide level. The truth is that the forest extraction is at an all-time high within the basin, increasing from 1 million to over 9 million board feet removed last year. We have repeatedly lowered environmental thresholds to increase logging, and billions of tax dollars were spent in California alone last year on thinning and so-called forest health. Yet none of this has increased the safety of our community. It is certainly not improving forest health. In fact, not a single agency, not CAL FIRE, not the Forest Service, or our insurance agencies, claim that thinning works during wind and climate-driven fire events, the only fires with which we need to be concerned. What every agency also agrees on is the need for massive efforts to harden homes and infrastructure against a changing climate. The Research and Policy Director of the Western Fire Chiefs Association recently said, "The single best thing agencies and governments can do to mitigate the worst effects of a rapidly changing climate and chaotic insurance market is to harden homes and infrastructure. We need safe evacuation routes, buried utilities, home-out defensible space, metal roofing, heat sealing vents, well-funded fire departments. The fiscally responsible government will focus their efforts on grant funding these long-term, proven solutions rather than endless subsidies for logging and biomass corporations." Now to our mayor. In light of the now obvious implementation of Project 2025, your open support of President Trump's policies has not aged very well. On LGBTQ issues, on housing and the unhoused, on aid recipients, your response to Measures T and N, your attacks on fellow council members and any progressive ideas, your attacks on cannabis, you seem far too often to represent only that portion of our community with which you agree. I would like to know if you are in fact a member of, past or present, and or ever were a moderator on a so-called Patriots group. If this is true, I believe you should immediately resign from this council. Clearly, such extreme opinions do not represent South Lake Tahoe as a whole, which is home to a wonderfully vibrant migrant population. Many of our neighbors are justifiably terrified, and any strong mayor would have long ago come out with a statement in support of our community members, whether they are undocumented or not. Your silence speaks more than anything you have said. You are not fit to be mayor if these are truly your goals in life. If you truly are a member of this Patriots group, I think the community deserves to know. We need an honest mayor who speaks for the entire community. And I think that many of your opinions, your jokes, your sarcasm, just don't speak to our community. And I would really hope that you will speak to our immigrant community. They're terrified. And you as the mayor who speak for our community should have said something long ago. And I hope that you denounce these groups. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Soderstrom. Is there anyone else in the room that would like to speak during public comment? Seeing none, we'll go to our Zoom platform.
Yeah, we do at least have one hand up. We'll go ahead and open up our Zoom platform. We have Ms. Johnson. Ms. Johnson, I can see that your mic is unmuted, however, we cannot hear you. Could you maybe try calling in on your phone or maybe turning up the volume on your computer? Oh, still can't hear you, and I know that we did speak earlier. Please go ahead and send your public comment to the public comment email, and I'll distribute it to council after the meeting. Thank you. No additional public comments, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jenkins,
First of all, I have.
your microphone.
Oh, yeah, I know. Okay. Where's my 5-year-old? Is it working? No, it's not working.
Here you go. You can use mine until we can get you another one. There you go.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
First, I appreciate, and I know we all do, people who express their opinion. That's what our country's all about, our city's all about. I just wanted to make a comment in regard to the forest health in our Tahoe region. I too am impressed by the work that's being done by our FireWise people to harden private properties. What I think some of us are talking about is not clear cutting, but we're talking about removing fuels that even Forest Service people say have largely accumulated in the forested areas. And the council will be talking about that at a strategic session and later, a little later, and there'll also be the Chamber of Commerce, as Mr. Wallace said, is going to be holding sessions, input sessions on that. We are very concerned about our environment. I'm very concerned about our environment, so we're not talking about clear cutting anything, and I'm adamantly opposed to that. But making fuel reduction, according to people that I just spoke to in a conference with experts in Los Angeles, outside the city limits, that's where we have our issues. So I just wanted to clarify. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins.
Mayor, can I just make one comment? I just wanted, if I could, Mr. Sharma's comments, I know that was also published in South Tahoe Now, and just for the record, I think the public should know, going back to Snow Globe, that was an issue on Snow Globe not deciding to come back. The city never made an action, the city council or city staff, to not allow Snow Globe. That was a decision on Viacom, and I think it should be known by the public that it wasn't an action by the city, that they didn't come here.
Thank you, Mr. Bass. Okay. We have our city commission and student advisory reports, and I do know that we do have a presentation from our two youth. Would you like to come forward, or Ms. Roverwood, is she in the room? Does she want to introduce them?
Madam Mayor, I'll just highlight really quick. Miss Alexander Pickens and Sebastian Guerrero are here. They're our student advisors through the superintendent's student ambassador program. They've been working with the assistant city manager and myself to design a community academy, which is consistent with our strategic plan goal based on fiscal sustainability, resiliency, and transparency. Specifically, it states that we want to evaluate bringing forward a community academy in a way to show our community the behind-the-scenes works that take place every day. So they have a presentation to highlight what that curriculum would look like and how members of the community could participate in it. I'll turn it over to them.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Alexandra Pickett, and this is Sebastian. And as Joe said, we're part of the Superintendent Student Advisory Council at school, and that council has helped us learn a lot about the behind-the-scenes events of the school. And we hope that the Community Academy will do a similar thing, but for community members, to the behind-the-scenes of how the city works.
Well, to start off, I would say that the purpose of the Academy is to engage community members, provide behind-the-scenes look at the city operations, understand decision-making processes, and showcase our city services. We are looking for 30 members. and these would be people that reside, work, or attend school here in South Lake Tahoe.
The program works on a 6-week structure from April 16th to May 28th, and it'll have 7 weekday sessions from 6 to 8 p.m. and 3 Saturday afternoon sessions from 4 to 6 p.m. And each week we combine topics and relevant activities, and at the very end, the last session will be a graduation ceremony and award ceremony.
So kind of going week by week. The first meeting would be Wednesday, April 16th, and that would be from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. And our topics would be city government structure, strategic planning, and communications. And a fun activity would be having a mock city council meeting.
The second week, we'll be looking into finance, and that's April 23rd, and it's another weekday session. And the topics will be city finance, budgeting, and spending, and we'll have a budgeting exercise to be paired with that.
Week 3 would be Wednesday, April 30th, and that would also be from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. And topics would be fire and police department, crime prevention and investigation, and what goes on with the emergency responses. Now, we will have a separate meeting, and that would be Saturday, May 30th from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. And we'd be touring the police department and the fire department.
The fourth week is infrastructure and sustainability, and this is also going to be like a 2-session week, one on Wednesday and one on Saturday. So the more lecture-style Wednesday one will be covering topics on streets, facilities, the airport, transit, and stormwater sustainability. And then the activity that's going to be paired with that is the tour of the corporation and airport.
For week 5, we'll be looking into parks and recreation. Some of the topics would be just what goes behind the scenes for the parks and recreations here in South Lake Tahoe. And for our next meeting on Saturday of that same week, we are going to do a tour of the new rec center that is being built currently.
And the final week is going to be planning and development, and we're going to look into planning, building, and housing within the city. And the activity is going to be a project development exercise.
Now, next week after that, we'd have a graduation for all of the members, and that include a ceremony, gifting a challenge coin, presentation, and feedback. We like to hear from what they thought about it.
Thank you guys for listening, and we hope to share more about our community academy in the future.
Thank you both so much. That was a great presentation, and it's a great program. I'm looking forward to it. Council, do you have any questions?
That's great.
Okay, we'll get to that part. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any member of the public that would like to speak on this topic? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to Zoom.
No additional comments, Mayor.
Okay, now Mr. Jenkins.
I just wanted to say this is an excellent program. I got my start in municipal government as an intern in the Lieutenant Governor's office in California when I was a lot younger than I am now, and it was an experience that stayed with me forever. And I'm really excited about what the city staff and council has supported this, and the students have supported this activity. I think it's a great way of engagement that we need, because you are our future.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Anybody else on council? Okay, we'll move on. Are there any other city commissioners that would like to make a report? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to our consent agenda.
Want a motion?
Council, is there anything on
So
the
yes, I
consent?
must recuse myself from item number 6, I believe.
Five.
5, excuse me, for property ownership in the vicinity.
Thank you, Mr. Bass. Anyone else? Okay, seeing none. We'll go to public comment on the consent agenda. Items number 4 and 5. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak on the consent agenda? Okay. Anybody on Zoom?
No, Mayor.
Okay. Bring it back to council for discussion or a motion.
Motion to approve the consent calendar.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Okay, we can vote.
Aye. Do I vote? Actually, I think I made the motion, but that's all right.
Okay, we'll do a voice vote.
Sorry. I have Mr. Jenkins first, that's why. Hold on one second.
I know where he's.
I'm sorry, I have a sick brain right now.
It was Jenkins and Robbins.
Yeah, I got it now.
Thank you.
Okay, there we go. That motion unanimously carries. Thank you for bearing with me.
No problem, Ms. Blankenship. Okay, we'll move on to regular unfinished business. Item number 6, amendment to professional services agreement with Placemate for administration of lease to locals program. And this is Ms. Wackenhut-Lomeli.
Good evening, Mayor, Council members, and staff. My name is Jessica Wackenhut-Lomeli, Housing Manager for the city. On October 19th, 2021, City Council adopted a resolution appropriating $500,000 in ARPA funds to initiate a long-term rental incentive program, and this is now known as Lease to Locals. 2 amendments were made to the program in August 2022 and November 2023 to continue administration and modifications to the guidelines. This also included the administration of the program until January 15th of 2025. On November 19th, 2024, Councilmember Wallace, seconded by Councilmember Robbins, passed motion 2024-121, renewing Placemate's contract for 12 months and amending the lease to locals program guidelines to allow 6-month leases through the end of 2025. The intent of the lease to locals program is to unlock existing housing for local workers. In the past 3 years, the program has unlocked 52 households, housed 127 residents, and 38 out of the 52 grants issued have been closed and completed. As of today, the Lease to Locals program is the only active program within the city that's geared towards moderate income residents. Placemate submitted an updated scope of work, which is in your packet. It's attachment 6 for this item that defines their role and includes the updated budget for the next 12 months. Today, staff is recommending that the City Council pass a motion to first, pass a motion amending program guidelines to include the addition of 6-month lease option for half of the 1-year incentive grant amount. Second, pass a resolution directing the mayor to execute amendment number 3 to agreement with Placemate to extend term of lease to locals rental incentive program until January 31st, 2026. And 3, authorize the budget appropriation of $90,000 from general fund undesignated excess reserves. Chase Janvrin is also here today from Placemate to answer any questions that you all may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, do you have any questions for either Ms. Wackenhut-Lomeli or Mr. Janvrin? Go, yes. Mr. Robbins?
In the last year, how many dollars have been handed out for grants for lease to locals landlords? How many dollars of grants have been distributed to landlords in the last year?
That's a good question. I'll defer to Mr. Thomas on this because I don't have it right in front of me.
Mr. Jammer, I believe it was 14 grants. Is it 14?
I think we ended the year.
I'm sorry, if you're going to address council, then you do.
Hi, council members, Chase Janvrin, General Manager of Placemate. I don't have the dollar amount off the top of my head, but I do believe it was, we ended the year with 15.
Ended the year with 15, so that was my clarification. Thank you, Mr. Janvrin.
And we don't have that dollar figure?
So the dollar figure would be, we don't have that off the top of my head, but it would be 15 households that were awarded grants.
And you had the dollar figure.
For over the past year.
The dollar figure for the last 3 years was 196,000.
Okay.
That was for the last 3 years, was 196. We do not have it in front of us for just this past year.
Okay, so the last 3 years, what was the number again, sorry?
196.
Just to clarify, yeah, the last 3 years, 196,000, and another 23,000 is encumbered by existing agreements for those that have unlocked their homes. So it's fair to say it would be
233,000 is the total number.
There you go, 233,000.
And in the same time period, how much funds have been spent on Placemate?
The total cost paid to Placemate has been $253,000.
So we have spent more on Placemate than we have on the grants
That is correct.
by about $20,000 worth. We spent slightly more on the administration of the program than we have on the actual grants from the program in the last 3 years. We don't have the number for the last year specifically, but that's overall. And I would note that one of the outcomes of the program seems to be that it had higher pickup in the beginning, and then it's sort of generally tailed off. So one might reasonably infer that in the recent year, that ratio, since the fees to Placemate have been constant, that ratio would be even worse now than it would have been in the first year.
Over time, the annual compared to last year, compared to the first year, it is reduced.
Yeah.
So that example you gave would be the case.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you very much.
Mr. Jenkins, your microphone.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mayor. When you say lease to locals, can you please define for me what you mean by locals? The program's designed to get working people into housing. Are we talking about whom?
Yeah.
Who are locals?
Yeah.
Not locos. That's a different subject.
So for the definition of locals, this was one of the amendments that was made to the program guidelines. It is the South Shore region. Let me find it really quick. I can't find it, but it is, the South Shore region is defined as from Tahoma to Glenbrook, so the entire South Shore within the Tahoe Basin.
One more question, that's it. Would it be reasonable, in your opinion, that employers, particularly large employers, make a contribution to this program so that it can continue or operate with less city dollars? Is that something that might be explored in the future?
Mr. Jenkins, I believe that would be a council decision.
Well, I was asking for her opinion as a professional, not as a politician.
Got it.
I can answer a little bit. There are large employers that currently provide housing. If they wanted to look at their portfolio and participate in a program with the city, we would entertain that. You're welcome.
Thank you. Council, any other questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you. So, please come forward. That we're doing public comment. Mr. Shawarma is coming forward.
For record, my name is Deepak Sharma. South Lake Tahoe doesn't have many jobs. Okay, and correct me if I heard it wrong, that anybody who works in Glenbrook to, further east shore, they get this grant. Means what did they contribute? I wouldn't be surprised if 90% of the people who are getting this grant work in state line casinos. Means it's not even separate county within the state. It's a different state altogether. Means you might be a rich town, but you don't have that much to kind of distribute all over. South Lake Tahoe doesn't have enough jobs for the number of housing units that are here. Keep subsidizing for other towns. You don't have to. You could fix your roads. You could do something better here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shawarma. Is there anyone else in the room that would like to make public comment on this item? Seeing none, we'll move to Zoom.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and open up our Zoom platform for anyone who wants to provide public comment. I do see one hand raised, telephone number 220. Oh, we cannot hear the caller. Is that something that you can fix in the control room? Because this is the second caller that we cannot hear. I'm sorry, caller 220, we cannot hear you. If you can you please send an email to publiccomment@cityofslt.us and I'll make sure will distribute that comment to council. No more additional public comments, Mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Blankenship. Mr. Robbins?
Are we back to council discussion?
We are.
Okay, good. I just want to clarify with staff, because there's actually two issues on this, there's sort of two concurrent issues on this agenda item. I just want to clarify that, because one is the placemate renewal contract. That's a vendor contract to provide administration for the program. And a second parallel related but independent item of altering the qualifications for the program. And I want to clarify, because we've had this back and forth before. The parameters of who qualifies for the program and what the program entails is largely up to the council's discretion, within reason. We can do 6 for 6, we can change the geographic requirements for eligibility, and the vendor placemate implements those parameters that we decide on. We don't have to go through a contract alteration to change those parameters. I just want to clarify that those two things are independent.
That is correct, they're independent.
Okay, so I just want us to, in our discussions, I just want us to make sure that we consider the two things about administration of the program and what the program should contain for eligibility and benefits as two sort of separate issues. They just happen to be on the same agenda item because they're sufficiently related, I guess, Brown Act-wise, and it's time efficient that way. I just want to say, I would be first in line to entertain making the eligibility more contained to folks who work in the city. I'm not opposed to that, but I want to talk about the administration as a separate, and the reason I'm making that a point is because I want to separate those two issues out. So we'll talk about, I'm happy to talk about that next, but I just want to not talk about everything all at once. So I think this is an important program. It's the only program we have that supports people in the missing middle, people who would be too high of an income level to qualify for the kind of state and federal subsidized housing like Sugar Pines, right? No one who works, for $25, $30 an hour is going to qualify for Sugar Pines for the most part. I'm sure there's going to be some corner case somewhere, but generally speaking, they're not going to qualify. Nurses are not going to qualify for the most part for those kinds of programs. And the bigger also problem to consider is that because of the federally imposed requirements on Sugar Pines, if you get promoted in your job while living in Sugar Pines, you get kicked out. Right? If you begin to earn too much because you've grown in your career and you've made a better life for yourself and you have pulled yourself up by your bootstraps, then you have to leave that housing and you're pushed onto the open market. But for many people that are too wealthy to qualify for direct subsidized housing are still not wealthy enough to qualify for even basic housing in our community. And this is this missing middle gap. So I think this is a hugely important program. That being said, I think the cost of administration is out of hand. Relative to the fact that we are spending more money on its administration than we're spending on the grants is hugely problematic for me. And I'm deeply uncomfortable with moving forward with the placemate contract. Again, not the program itself, but the contract for the administration of the program. I think the program and the grant amount, that's great, but I think the administration is just not cost efficient. This is not responsible spending if we're spending literally more on administration than we are on the grants. There's two things. One option that was presented at the end of the preceding council. So this was back in November. It was November-ish. I'm trying to remember.
November 19th.
About 500 years ago, was insourcing the administration, right? Taking the money that we're currently already spending on the contractor, on the vendor to do this, and then having us have our own website. And there was concern. I was supportive of that. There was concern from other members of the council at the time that that's going to be a fair bit of work. Placemate has a platform that they use, a pre-built website and everything, and that's lovely. except it's also kind of not doing us a lot of good if it's costing more than they're able to use that, if they're only able to use that platform to get fewer dollars out in grants than we're spending on them running their platform. That may not be a good platform then, right? The other alternative to insourcing, because maybe we don't want to do that kind of work, I would be more comfortable with, is if the contract were structured in a fee for incentive. Because right now, the way this contract is structured, it's a flat $7,000 a month in spare change, or less.
7,500 a month.
7,500 a month.
Flat rate.
That's at least a full staff person and maybe 1.5 staff people, right? That's 1 to 1.5 FTEs of fully encumbered.
I'd say maybe one.
Maybe one, yeah. So but we're only doing 15. We only did 15 units, right? So that's slightly more than one application per month. That's easy enough to do with one staff person. So the alternative to insourcing would be to structure this at least in a fee-for-service kind of way, rather where they get, maybe there's a base level of amount per month, but then they get a certain amount of dollars per placement, right? So that there is an alignment of the incentive for the vendor to actually execute on the work that we want them to do, if we don't want to bring it in-house ourselves. I know when, Zach, you talked about, you think that is possible for staff in November. I don't know if this has changed. I guess this is the question. Has this changed since November? Do you still think staff could insource this work for less than $7,000 a month?
Yeah, Mayor, council member, what I was trying to communicate at the last meeting was on a technical level, I'm sure staff is capable of doing this type of work. From a workload, because that hasn't occurred yet, it's hard to judge exactly what it's going to be. I will qualify to say that there is background work for every one household you put in there. There's follow-up and communication with applicants and things like that. So certainly there is background work that would take staff time and things like that. So because we haven't done that, I just can't gauge how much that would be. What I was trying to communicate on November 19th was just a technical ability, I think, to do it, being that the city has qualified staff.
And again, David, I want to have that conversation about who qualifies. I just wanted to have this conversation separate from that is all. So those are my thoughts and I'd like to get the rest of the council's thoughts on the contract's value, not the program's value.
Mm-hmm.
If we want to have that conversation, I'm happy. I just want to separate these issues out.
Okay. Mr. Jenkins?
I think your comments relating to a performance-based contract makes sense to me, particularly when we look at the numbers that are being placed, with that total number being larger almost than the amount we're spending on the subsidy. And so that makes sense. It's an incentive to the company. Not that they're not doing good work, but it's an incentive to them. I think if it was tied to the subject we're not dealing with at this moment, but will in a minute, to looking at working locals internally in the city, there might be even more success. But I'll await for any motion you might make.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Mr. Bass or Mr. Roberts?
Yeah, I would just agree with that. I think the numbers of what we're paying out in fees and what we're getting, performance from the services are pretty glaring. I was thinking the same thing, that maybe there's some way for a performance-based payment or whatnot. I think that makes sense.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Mr. Bass?
Yeah, I mean, I largely agree. I mean, I also kind of look at this, and I think that definitely we want to continue to support housing, but when we look at it, it seems like I think right now there's about 14 houses, because that's how many haven't closed out of the, so with the amount of money we're putting out, I mean, is it somewhat time to go back to the drawing board and see, are there ways that this amount of money unlocks more than 14 housing units? I know that it's been brought up from folks in the real estate, our local realtors, to say, look, if there was a way that the city could help kind of back up some of the bad actors in the local long-term rental world, if there, and I don't know what that exactly looks like, but it may be time to go back to the drawing board and approach our local realtors to say, hey, what assistance from the city could you use that would help your, people that you deal with and property owners decide to, rent long-term, instead of kind of this approach of let's, try to marry the lease and the people, but just getting more inventory put on the market. There is so much fear around, renting long-term to a local based on what has happened and people's behavior and those type of things. So is there things the city could do, legal help or whatever that may be, this funding could be better for. But again, I think that may be just a thing of like, going back to the drawing board and just to look at it. So as far as though, I completely agree that the cost is very high for what we're getting, in my opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Bass. I actually agree with all of you. I think that we shouldn't be paying more in fees than in subsidies to the people. I would be interested in hearing from Mr. Janvren on whether or not they have a incentive-based structure with any of the other communities. I do know that Incline Village recently signed up with you guys. Do you have that system in place in order to do something like that, or are you willing?
Thank you for the opportunity to respond to that. We do not have a pay-for-results structure implemented in any of the jurisdictions that we partner with. Our pricing, we do have tiered pricing based on volume, and it's basically 10, very small markets that have less than 10 anticipated units, and then 10 to 30 units, and then above 30 units. And we currently have contracts with all of those different sizes. Truckee, where we started, is a high volume market that we do more than 30 units every year, so they pay more than the city of Southlake does. So pay for results, we haven't done that before, and going back to the comment at the last council meeting that I was here, I'll point out that I understand that the conversion rate of really close to 10% is producing fewer results than any of us would like to see. It is still a substantial amount of work to create those results. Dozens, yeah.
No, go ahead. I just have two questions for you based on what you just said. One is, what are you doing differently in Truckee than is happening here? What's the difference between the volume in Truckee versus the volume here? And then the second one is, well, go ahead and answer that.
Sure. Well, I think it's not what's different in Truckee, it's what's different in Southlake. Southlake has always been both the most restrictive program and the smallest incentive. The incentives in Southlake are less than half of what Truckee's are. When Placer County was launched, Placer's incentives were actually 3 times what Southlake's were. So comparing to Placer County, we have just about the same number of total leads in Placer County and Southlake, but Placer has a 20% conversion rate, so they've got 100 participating properties, plus or minus. Southlake has a 10% conversion rate, but with the incentives being half as much, I don't think that should be a surprise. So, right, so we're going to transition fewer properties with a smaller incentive.
Okay. Then my next question is, just off the top of your head, if you don't have it, it's fine. But we are currently funding workers and housing from Tahoma to Glenbrook. Do you know what the percentage is outside of the city limits that we have helped and houses that we have put into play?
Yeah, I can easily get that. We have a tracker that is consistently shared with staff, so the staff has that as well. So we can pull up all the employers for everybody that's participated. I don't have it off the top of my head. I will go out on a limb and guess that it is less than a third are outside of the city limits.
That's actually sufficient.
Okay.
Does anyone else have a question for Mr. Janfrin while he's here? Mr. Jenkins?
I do, along the lines that we've been discussing. If it was based on incentive, but from the savings, the potential savings, if we add it to the incentive, if we increase the incentive somewhat for people who live here, live in town, maybe we would get more participation by people who own homes and are willing to rent it because there would be a greater incentive for them to do so. And, I think most of us would like to see 100% of the people who live here and pay taxes and live in town be the ones who are the recipients. Or in the alternative, that the county subsidize, if we're subsidizing other people, let them put up some money to subsidize their folks in our program.
Was there a question in that?
What do you think of that concept, that if we were narrowing it to, I know we're not supposed to get into that, but if we're narrowing to a city as the first choice, but we're increasing the incentive because of savings, maybe there would be greater interest by those who have homes, based on the comments you made about what they're doing in Truckee, which is, I understand they're doing a lot of good things in Truckee, and we're doing good things too, but I mean, so if there was more incentive, do you think you'd get more bite by the owners of properties?
Yeah, yes. Is the
Mayor,
short-
can I ask a clarifying question, because I think there's some cross
Thank you.
information here. To clarify, the guidelines require that the person live within the city limits. So
Thank you.
the resident must live in the city. Now, they could work, let's say in Myers, for
Right.
example, but it's required that the house be located within the city limits.
That is a very good clarification. Thank you.
But the house or to qualify, you have to be a resident of the city, or could you then move in and become
That's correct. So the incentive grant is paid to the property owner who owns the house, and that house must be located within the city.
So just for clarification, so that we're all on the same page, the person being housed lives in the city.
Correct.
The house is in the city.
Correct.
They can work from Tahoma to Glenbrook.
Correct.
That's perfect. Thank you for that clarification. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Janfrin. We'll continue our discussion. So, Mr. Robbins, does that change anything about what you said? And it's okay if it doesn't, I'm just asking.
Yeah, well, one way to, I was almost as a joke, but one way to improve the overhead administration ratio would be to increase the grant amounts. Right?
It's math.
I mean, that's how fractions work. Like, that's just how they work. And honestly, I mean, I initially started saying that as a joke, but I mean, really, that if we are that far below the relative amounts that other communities are using and doing better at, that suggests that one way to pick up the pace and, honest to God, improve the cost ratio is to spend more on the grant part. Right.
I think also the conversion rate is where
Correct.
10% versus 20%.
Right, having more people who are interested in follow through, people who have done it 1 year, pick up the second year, because there's two separate conversion ratios we're interested in tracking, which is actually, let me ask that question, sorry, you just sat down, which would be, there's two rates. One is like people who contact you out of interest who wind up going through and renting, and then the other one is people who rent in 1 year, continuing to rent in a second year. Those are two different conversion rates, and what are they? What have they been?
Yeah, we refer to those as the conversion rate of who participates, and then the retention rate of who continues to rent long-term, even though there is no additional incentive. And the retention rates are fairly consistent within the three markets we operate in the Tahoe region, in the 70 to 80%. But I will say that South Lake last year, from 2023 participants, 93% of them, all but one, continued to rent long-term without an additional incentive, which is the highest we've seen in any market.
So the retention rate is actually quite high then?
Yes.
So that's actually good. That means, if we can get the conversion rate, which is like your customer interest conversion rate essentially, up a little higher, that would translate with high fidelity to a longer term retention rate. And we don't really track them after year 2, do we?
No.
Because then it's completely, it's a private market rental essentially at that point. So the real goal, I mean, the big goal is to get them all the way into year 2. right? Because that's now you've created essentially a new rental in the city, which is the thing we desperately need the most of. So
Can I ask a question of Mr. Janner and interrupt you? What is the difference between our program and Truckie's program? Can you clarify that for us? I mean, I know what ours is, but
Sure. So both Truckee and East Placer County now, East Placer launched with an even larger one, but they are now consistent at $4,500 per qualified tenant for a long-term lease, that's over 12 months, and $2,000 for a seasonal lease. As you
And
already
that's
mentioned,
under
that Washoe
a
County
year?
Incline Village is about to launch literally next week, and they're doing the same incentive amounts.
so 4,500 for over a year.
Yeah.
And 2,000 for 6 months,
For anywhere between 5 to 11 months.
5 to 11 months.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Actually, Jack brought another
Sorry.
question up that, and I probably knew this from when we first started it, but so does that though guarantee a market rate rental? And if so, like if the owner's taking that funds, is the rental rate gonna be guaranteed at a certain market rate, or do they get to basically determine the rate that they rent it?
Yes, now we're getting into the nuance of the guidelines and why we set the guidelines the way that we do. So I think to fairly answer that, I have to give some context. But the short answer is that there is a blanket rent cap similar to the South Lake Tahoe program of $3,500 a month. We have experimented with per unit rent caps, but what we found is that people anchor to those numbers. So for example, if a 2-bedroom maximum rent was $2,800, everybody who has a 2-bedroom sees that number and says, great, I'll do that. But not all 2-bedrooms are created equal. So we felt like we were inadvertently increasing the price of the aged, that should be cheaper units. So then we moved to a blanket cap that forces property owners to do a bit of due diligence to determine what their unit is worth based on location, condition, et cetera.
Go ahead.
So I just want to run a couple of numbers by. So in the last three, sorry, I'm on.
Thank you.
Thanks. In the last 3 years, over the preceding 3 years, we've spent, averaged out, so not, because we don't have the per year numbers, but averaged out over the last 3 years, we've spent $78,000 a year on the program. This would be a little more than that in the first year, a little less in the subsequent years, but averaged out $78,000 per year. Throwing out a thought, if hypothetically, if we doubled the grants and we repeated the performance of last year with all new entrants, like we doubled, like we got the same everyone last year, which would be a step up because it would mean that would be as many applicants as we got this last time around, this next time around, then we would be paying $155,000 a year. That's a lot of money to me. I'll be honest, like if I had that much money in my pocket, that would be kind of a lot. But in the scheme of the city, that's not that much, really. We have an $80 million general, or $60 million general funds budget, $150-something million total overall budget. It's not nothing, but it's not a debilitating amount of money. And it would make the efficiency ratio double. I was originally being glib about that, like I was, but honestly, like
Still math.
we would, if we increase the grant, we're not increasing we can increase the grant without increasing the overhead cost.
Except Mr. Janvron did say that for people who have more people using the program, they charge more.
But if we had the same, if we repeated the number of applicants last year, then we'd
Yeah.
still be in the same tier. We'd just double
Correct.
the total number of housing units,
Correct.
you know, and I'm saying like,
I'm good.
that might, if we're uncomfortable with insourcing the program, which kind of sounds like we still may be, or at least but that's another way to think about it. And we should at least think about increasing the grant because it's still a pretty cost-efficient way to make housing available relative to new construction, to acquisition.
Especially if the retention is
As high as it is. Because we're not spending that money for 1 year, it's at least 2 and possibly ongoing.
Mayor, I think
Your microphone.
I'll get to green right. I think the concept that the Councilman Robbins is, that it's a good concept. But what I would like to suggest, if that's the pleasure of the council, that we also look at other funding sources as possible sources, and these are programs through the state, TIFs, tax increment financing. We look at the FIDs, things that exist in law. They are similar to what previous redevelopment that I've had quite a bit of experience with, and they might be a source in lieu of using the general fund, because the general fund is, I mean, but I'm willing to try this out to see what it is, and so I'm interested in what kind of motion you might want to make.
Go ahead. I have a response, but
I mean, so there's a couple things here. For one, when we started this, we were using ARPA funds. We're now talking about using our general fund. So there's a big consideration to think about when we look at that, because we're literally talking about taking it from something else that's obviously we need a lot of funds. So I do think that even though it might only be $150,000, to me it is a lot of money, regardless of the cities, just because again we know all of our needs and we're very short on our actual overall needs. So I look at it a little bit different. Now, I do want to continue supporting housing. I think we need the needs, but when I look at even $150,000 in a year, and that for last year, that's 14 houses, right? If we got together with our realtor community, property managers, the folks that actually lease houses to locals, especially in this middle sector, what do they do with $150,000 spread over 15 houses? Well, that could be $5,000 annually knocked off of rent, with a guarantee that that $500 a month is going to come off of the lease's rent, which makes housing more affordable for this middle. And then something like a $5,000 bond, we'll call it, or deposit for legal funds, that if they get into an issue with their tenant, they've got a $5,000 bond. And so I think that's why it could be an interesting thing to get together with our actual property owners in this town, property managers, excuse me, and sit down like with a group of them and make strategy around how do you open up the inventory. These are the folks that have been leasing property in our town for 25 plus years, and I think they would honestly, I think it should be they should be a big part of this conversation, and I think we can really get to some interesting things. So when we start talking about general fund, it changes it for me. ARPA money was a lot different. And so anyways, and I think that possibly, I don't know where we're at, like if this has to be made tonight, but maybe this is something we're going to have a lot of housing talks in our strategic session, so I don't know.
So, I'm sorry, Mr. Robbins, do you mind if I go for just 1 second? Because I think that we can do both. I think that if we could try this for a year under the new set of circumstances and see if it really is effective, and if it is, then we know that we're going to have success. I also agree with putting together a group of property managers and finding out from them what the market really needs here, and moving forward on some of their ideas, like the two that you just brought up. I think we can do both of those things. And I agree with you, it was ARPA funds and now it's general fund. But if we can affect this in a much greater way, what we've all wanted from lease to locals, it seems like a win-win. Mr. Roberts, do you have anything that you want to?
Well, it
And then
seems
we'll
like
go
there's
back
a
to Mr.
lot
Robbins.
of things that are changing in the plan, so I'm wondering if it's like Cody said, Mr. Bass said earlier, that maybe we need to retool this and rethink it. I believe we have different terms than what they have in Truckee, and we're talking about additional funds and where those funds come from and seeking other funds, so it almost sounds like it's time to rethink the whole thing.
I think in the last 2 years, we've heard a lot from property owners about what they say they want. Like, we haven't failed to hear. I mean, the three of us have been sitting here for the last 2 years, but you guys have been following along too. We've had commercial property owners or rental property owners come up and say what they want over and over and over and over again. And the thing that they're consistent about is damage and evicting tenants. And the latter one, a lot of that is sort of COVID related, because that was a state imposed moratorium. We couldn't do anything about that under any circumstances. So,
Did we recover under SB 90?
we don't outrank the state or the feds for that matter, so there's not much we can do on that score. But the other things in terms of like offering, damage insurance programs, damage insurance subsidies, something along those lines, I don't know that the city should want to get into the individual business of that, but if there's tenant insurance offered commercially that could then be subsidized, that would be something that we might get into, right? Rather than having a city insurance program. I'm not suggesting we get into the
Yeah.
actuarial business.
Excuse me, Madam
Yeah, I
Mayor,
was gonna say, I
we're
was
getting a little far
a little
afield
far
from the
afield.
item, so
So- Yeah.
I would suggest for the purpose of moving the meeting along to focus on the request for tonight, and if you want to make changes, we might need to bring it back at a future meeting, and then if someone wants to request
you.
a future
I
item.
think we should have I think then we should have this longer conversation at the strategic plan.
I think
in
that's a
March,
great
because
idea.
I think we should decide what we want to ask for.
Perfect.
And the deciding what we want to ask for is going to be a longer conversation than we can have within the Brown Act
I
context.
do
tonight.
have one question for Ms. Stroud. My understanding is, based on what I read, is that our agreement with Placemates has ended as of January 15th, and this is sort of our renewal. So we would have a break in service.
Correct, unless council wants to make any changes to the agreement tonight that Placemate is willing to agree to on the spot, then we would need to bring it back, and there would be a pause in the service during
Okay,
that time.
so, thank you. So, so the two items that we're talking about, according to the agenda, is, since we've already, well, no, didn't we approve the extension of the program?
No.
I thought that, okay. So we need to talk about the amounts and whether we're going for the 6 month leases, and then we'll table all the rest until we get to strategic planning.
But we could also table it, and then, yeah, we would have.
Or we can table all of it,
We
yes.
could, but then we
If
would
I
have
can
a-
ask a clarifying question. So we're not in contract currently with Placemates. If the pleasure of the council is to not give direction to negotiate approval of this attached agreement, what does that do to the existing inventory in the system?
So for inventory that, let's say a grant ends and we pay out, if the grant ends, the city would pay out the remaining half. That's part of the guidelines. That would continue, but it would be staff doing the work as opposed to Placemates. Their professional service agreement ended.
Okay.
And so we just wouldn't get, we wouldn't get new people, but we would be able to continue satisfying our conditions on what exists.
I'd be pretty angsty about having the program lapse. It's the only thing we have right now. Having it lapse for months on end, especially as we come up towards spring, I think people start looking for housing in the summer, would be unwise. And it is worth noting that the contract's only for 2 years, so it's not going on for forever.
What's our out clause?
That's a good question.
The attached contract is 1 year, set to expire at the end of January 26.
Oh, it's 1 year. I thought it was 2 years.
I hear you on that, but I also think that 3 months isn't critical time. I think it just fits well with, I think we're having a much larger housing discussion in March, and I think it really fits well with us really strategizing on a lot, which is what that's gonna be about. So to me, it just makes sense to continue it. Yes, because I think that we're gonna have a much larger discussion that surrounds this whole topic.
So this is only a 1 year contract. I was mistaken. I thought it was 2. This is only a 1 year contract. So my suggestion here is I'll put out an actual concrete suggestion, since I think we've had good rounds of conversation. So my suggestion is the following: for the next 1 year, that we agree to continue the Placemate contract, which I think we should spend the next year giving some thought to how that goes forward, insourcing and whatnot, especially at the strategic plan session, to thinking about how to make that more cost effective. But let's double the subsidy for 1 year and continue the contract for 1 year. And then in March, we have a strategic plan. We have an extended conversation about what other things we need. And then we come back before the year is out, before 1 year from now, with a revamping of the program. And we've had time to work out what it would entail, what the budget would look like, and we have time to do that engagement. Because otherwise, we're gonna have like a full quarter of the year with potentially nothing, and there's no guarantee that in March, we're gonna have something ready to go to replace it anyway that's any different.
What would that be, just so I can be clear? So you're talking about bringing the 150 to 300 plus 90,000 for administrative costs. So is that right? We'd be talking
The
300.
administrative costs would be the same.
Well, it's 90,000, that's what it says here, but I'm trying to get to, I think we're at 150 was what we put out in grants. Is that about accurate? And so we'd be doubling that?
That was in 3 years. That was over 3 years, not over 1 year.
Potentially be doubling that. It would still depend on the number of people utilizing the program.
Correct.
Right, so, but, so if we're saying though that we're doubling it, we had 14 last year, which we put out, I forget what the number was, 119, something in that ballpark, and then we still have these 14 to pay out the end of. There's another 25,000 there, so I think we were about 150 on the 14. If we double and increase the grants, we easily could get to double that cost, so we'd be at 390,000 of general fund money. To me, that's a large number to consider at a strategic planning session.
Not in the next 1 year.
14 houses is what is granted right now. Is that 119?
It's based on the per person.
To clarify, what would basically be happening, so there's two pieces. There's the PSA with placement, then there's the guidelines. The guidelines is what was approved by council, and that dictates the cost for each grant. Right now, it's $2,000 per qualified tenant. So I think what the council is saying is altering that number. And so it sounds like it would apply, it would change that amount paid per qualified tenant moving forward. Those that have already existed in the program, used the program, kind of using it, would be under the old guidelines. And so that number wouldn't change. It would be the potential grants moving forward if the council chose to alter that payment amount.
14 times 2,000?
That's the number
That's
of
for the
units.
grants.
That's the number of units,
Right,
not
right,
the
right,
number
but
of
it's
people.
not the number of
But I
people.
understand on the,
Yeah.
but we don't have the data on the individual grant amounts total, so it's between 2 and 5 up to the max, right?
Right.
So at the low end, that's $28,000, not $280,000.
Right.
You don't really get to 300, that's not a thing for 1 year.
We
That's over-
appropriated 500,000 in 2021, and we've gone through all of that, so I'm confused. I think we have hit close to the 120 to
If I may try to
150.
add some clarity here. So in the policy guidelines, the maximum total grant amount as proposed for 6 months for a one-person studio is listed at $1,000. And for a
Per qualified tenant, yeah.
per qualified tenant, that's the incentive pay, right? That goes to the landlord. And then 2,000 for a 12-month. So
And if we went with Truckee, it would be 2,000 and
4,500.
4,500. Mr. Roberts.
And so I
you've
want a
been-
clarifying question,
Okay, thank
sorry,
you.
Mayor, but Mr. Thomas, in the staff report financial implication section, it lists that 77,000 is still remaining in the incentive. Can you explain?
Yeah, let me back up here.
Yep.
So out of the 500,000, out of the 500,000 of ARPA funds that was originally allocated to this whole program, 300,000 of that was allocated towards grant payments. 77,000 of that original 300,000 is remaining when you factor out all the encumbered remaining payments that will come throughout this year, right? So 77,000 is remaining. That is not tied to any existing grants or.
So I have a suggestion for council. Recognizing there's 77,000 already appropriated to the incentive program, you could take action to not add more incentive money. You could suggest to us that the policy dollar amounts we were talking about be increased, and our housing department would watch that. And as soon as they start to get close to being depleted, we will bring this back for a discussion if we get to that point.
I like that.
Yeah. So that addresses the incentive amount. We have money we can use. The second question for council is, do you want to appropriate a new 90,000 of general fund for the administration, or hold off for now and let's let this continue until we have a strategic plan discussion? That's where we're at.
Okay, Mr. Roberts, you've been waiting very patiently.
Yeah, I just was curious, are we able to entertain and an opportunity if placemat to agree to it, that we just extend the current contract as is for 3 months? Because I think the things that we're discussing, the changes we're thinking of making, are going to benefit them as well. Is that something we can entertain?
Well, that's the first, that is the question 1 out of 2, right? Question 1 out of 2 is extending their administration, which is independent of the grant award size and qualifications, which is the parameters of the program, which we decide independently of they simply administer what we decide in terms of the program specifics. So that is what's in front of us, is simply extending their administration for another 1 year.
But just as Keith said, I'm wondering as well, is can we say there's 77,000 for the grants? How much is 3 months of the contract worth? We'll approve that. We'll pay the administration cost for 3 months, and we'll put the 77,000 that's already in there from ARPA funds to get through those 3 months. And then in our strategic session, we really decide what it looks like, and we enter into the future of it from there.
And so, Mr. Bass, would you entertain the fact that we would increase the amounts to the
Yeah,
trophy levels?
as
for
long as we're not
instance?
going
As long
past
as
the
we're-
77,000. As long as it's, I don't mind, as
Okay,
long as
well,
we're not allocating the funds.
based on all of that, I am willing to accept a motion so we can move this along.
Who made it?
I mean, either we,
I don't care.
yeah, go for, I mean, what is the motion? Are we going on this 3 months? I think that's what.
I
that's
think
what you-
we're
okay.
all in agreement with that.
Probably
Okay,
find
so
out if
then-
Placemate will accept a 3-month contract, because the contract before us is for a 1-year contract.
Offer acceptance consideration, that's the contract, if they accept it, they don't.
And I want clarity. Are you proposing 3-month extension with them at the monthly rate? So it'd be 7,500 times 3?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So
And the
that's,
incentive is to them is to place as many, there's certainly an incentive to,
so the motion, I hear, yeah, so the motion would be to modify the guidelines on page,
Is there an option to do a per month rather than per year?
Probably not.
That's what I was trying to figure out. Because
I-
the contract before us is a 1-year contract.
I possibly have a motion, if
Go
you
for
don't
it.
mind.
all right,
Okay.
yep, sorry.
Okay, here we go. I move that we amend the professional services agreement with Placemate for the administration of the Lease to Locals program to extend the term and allow for the 6-month leases, and also to increase our amounts to be equal to what the Truckee program is, $2,000 and $4,500. We pay the $7,500 monthly fee out of the general fund, as we have been doing, and then up to the incentives be up to the $77,000, and then our council will review this and move forward beyond that.
let me second your motion with a question. The question is, I don't want to see any commitment beyond the budget, the fiscal year, because I think all of us have to have a discussion overall about where we spend our money and for what, and that'll be prerogative of our discussion during the strategic plan. So I assume that none of this would relate to extending it beyond this fiscal year, because I don't want to get committed into something that beyond that fiscal year.
My motion only encumbers the money that's already been set aside, and then we have a budget session, and if nothing else happens at our strategic plan, we would still look at this next November, because it's only a 1-year term.
Madam Mayor, I need clarity. You said, so the way I see it now, the program has in our ARPA designated budget, $77,000 and $6,100 for marketing purposes. So safe to assume we have $83,000 that is set aside for incentive and marketing that was going to. So are you saying the 3-month payment would come out of those funds?
My understanding is they don't come out of
They
those
don't. I mean,
funds. And
so
so
you're
that was
saying you
not my
want an
motion.
appropriation?
I said 7,500 out of our general fund, which is where it's coming from.
7,500 times 3 months.
But it should be clarified 3 months.
I'm lost now.
I did say that.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I did say that.
That was, That should have been.
I'm sorry,
a
I do have a
resolution.
question because I'm confused now. You wanted to extend the contract as it's presented, except for changing the incentive amount, correct?
Correct.
So for 1 year.
And to allow for the 6-month leases.
But we're going for 1 year. I thought we were gonna go for 3 months, because we're gonna go for when we're going up to the strategic session. Because at that point, we don't wanna commit to a year if we decide to make a major change at the strategic session. So it's a 3-month
So
extension.
So, Madam Mayor, we do have a motion and a second, and I think it's been clarified, so we can vote. If it doesn't pass, there could be another motion.
I need a clarification. So is the general fund appropriation $22,500? Is that what you're saying, Madam Mayor?
Correct.
Okay,
That's
thank
what
you.
my motion was.
Rather than 90, which is in the staff report.
Rather than 90, it'll only cover 3 months.
Sorry,
That's okay. But we can only spend up to 77,000 in the actual incentive because we have an opportunity. The reason that I didn't say, and we'll vote on this in 1 second. The reason I didn't say the contract for the whole year is because we are not negotiating currently with Placemates, and this is a 1-year extension. We're just gonna do something before the end of the 3 months. So are there,
I guess I have a legal question for council then. So
Okay.
are we gonna be binded, if we pass this 1-year contract, even though we're only allocating 22.5, we're gonna end up owing them 90,000 if we approve the contract as written? We need to actually ask for it to be amended to 3 months, or we're on the hook for the entire contract.
probably.
So we do have our standard 30-day termination clause, which we can terminate for convenience, but I would suggest it's better practice probably if we're going to enter into a 1-year contract to appropriate the money for the whole year for financial reasons.
And if that's the case, I'm going to withdraw myself.
I had a question with the mayor's motion, did not include pass a resolution to appropriate the money. Does she need to say
Because
those
it's not
words?
part of the, I was looking at the item text, not the suggested action.
Yeah, that was like way outside of what was written down, so it's kind of confusing.
Can I withdraw my motion and then start over?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'll withdraw myself.
Okay. I move that we amend the program guidelines to include the addition of a 6-month lease option for half of the 1-year incentive grant amount. Actually, I'm going to strike that. I move that we amend the program guidelines to include the addition of a 6-month lease option. And also the resolution directing the mayor to execute the agreement with Placemate to extend the term of leased of locals rental incentive program until January 31st, 2026, and authorize the budget appropriations of $90,000 from the general fund undesignated SS reserves. We also would like to align our program with the Truckee program at the 2,000 and 4,500 rates. And this council will meet at our strategic plan and decide from there how we're going to move forward. We will not be encumbering anything beyond the 77,000 that's already in this fund for incentives.
So we're going to have a contract with them
Nope,
until January.
there's a motion. Is there a second?
Well, I have
I'll second.
Okay.
Does staff
Now we can
understand?
have discussion.
I'm almost sure I followed all of that. Is staff comfortable with that? I'm pretty sure I got all that.
Here's what I heard.
Did you get that? I wanna
Mayor,
make sure you're-
the motion is approve it for a 12-month extension, appropriate 90,000 of general funds, change the program guidelines to include the 6-month language and incentive pay consistent with truckies. And I guess the final part is a commitment from the council to discuss this. And if in March, the council says we don't want to continue the program, then my marching orders will be to send a termination notice to lease to locals.
And in this intervening 2 or 3 months, we do not go beyond that 77,000. That's the only thing that I would add to what
For
you
the
said.
incentive, yeah.
So we're budgeting $90,000 to January of next year, but we have $77,000 for incentives. What you're saying is that we'll discuss the program in March to discuss its operation, and that then we'll decide if we want to continue the program as it is. Um, I, again, I think you and I talked about this, Mr. City Manager, that committing general funds that could be used in fixing and repairing our streets versus a program that we're not sure we're going to do. I get a little, I'm concerned because we haven't, the new members have not had an opportunity to discuss where we're spending our money. I'm not getting excited. I'm just talking. And I don't know why the term couldn't be extended for 3 months or until March, until we, and we could agree to extend it a longer period after our session. I believe, Madam City Attorney, we could extend it a month, extend it 2 months, extend it 3 months, if the parties agreed. So,
Yes, but that's not the motion that's before you, so I would suggest we vote on that motion.
well,
Okay.
yeah, okay, well,
Thank
then that helps us in how we vote, I guess.
It does.
When you put us in a box, that's what happens.
Everyone, please vote.
It's a 30-day back out. What difference does it make?
Can I, that's one thing, I'm sorry, can I ask a question before I vote here? On the 30-day clause, we're bound, like, I know with some contracts, we don't pay monthly. We pay the contract straight up, or is this, do we know that this is a monthly payment?
It's a monthly payment.
Okay. And you're comfortable completely with our ability to back out for whatever convenience clause, whatever we want to back out for?
Correct.
Okay.
It's not the cleanest, but it's functional.
As long as we can back out.
That motion carries. Thank you.
Okay, so we make a commitment to relook at this in March, and that is right around the same time that we do our mid-year budget. So if we choose not to extend this, then we will, we'll go from there. I think
It can burn out.
it can
then,
burn
and
out,
we
yeah.
can allow that.
So
But we
are
will
we
have
all
a
done on
extended
this
discussion on
item?
this topic in March.
Okay, thank you. Let's take a break.
And the-
We'll
the six-
take a break
The
until
6 was for half the
7:15.
amount, right? That was, because they said the 6-month thing, that,
I'm going to call the meeting back to order. And we're moving on to item number 7, update on snow removal negotiations with Heavenly. Mr. Irvin.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. Just by way of background, in November of 2024, then Mayor Bass requested future agenda item regarding snow removal conversation with Heavenly Mountain Resort, and then Mayor Pro Tem Wallace seconded that item be brought back for discussion. So here we are tonight. The suggested motions are included in the executive summary. 1, to provide direction to staff on the terms of a potential snow removal agreement with Heavenly, or 2, terminating negotiations. Once that was added to our agenda planning calendar, I went and met with Mr. Shadar Edelman, Vice President and General Manager of Heavenly Mountain Resort, November 20th. Explained to him what was requested, and we began conversations. In November 27th, he sent me a draft snow removal agreement that listed language and verbiage that highlighted what Heavenly would perform with regards to snow removal on Lower Ski Run Boulevard between Needle Peak and Pioneer Trail, Saddle Road between Wildwood Avenue and Keller Road between Saddle Road and the northeast entrance to the resort parking lot, Wildwood Avenue between Needle Peak and Saddle Road, and Needle Peak Road between Ski Run Boulevard and Wildwood Avenue. And I believe the city clerk's pulling up a PowerPoint presentation. Thank you. Oh, sorry. I can't see it. It's no eyes back here. So after I reviewed the draft agreement, I made note of the agreement terms that were listed in it, very similar to what were in the same terms that the city council approved back in 2023 and 24. Those specifically highlighted Heavenly paying the city a flat rate for street sweeping at $3,500, and to reimburse if there was any road damage from negligence from their plowing. I reviewed it, met with Mr. Edelman again, and informed him that the request was to highlight the cost implications from allowing additional snow removal on those streets I just mentioned, as well as the trip generation impacts from patrons that were driving to the Cal Base Lodge. So what we've done over the last couple months, the Public Works Director and myself, is try to analyze what the increase in snow removal operations is, as well as the increase from vehicle trips for patrons driving to Cal Lodge, which passes through city streets into a county property. The impact of the snow removal has many aspects, and I'd like to turn over this part of the presentation to Mr. Najad to talk about what those impacts are and ultimately what the proposed dollar amount is to quantify the impacts.
Thank you. So as Mr. Irvin mentioned, we looked at different methodologies to calculate the impacts of snow operations. As you can see on the slide, snow operation shortens the life of the pavement, obviously because of the downward pressure of the snow plow equipment. And based on research that we found, it's about 10 to 15% reduction in life. And typically it reduces the life of the pavement between 5 to 15 years, reduction in the life of pavement. Next slide, please. So in order to calculate the fair share costs, we used a 3-step process. First of all, to come up with a fair share percentage for Heavenly Development. And what we did was that we used a standard way to be able to calculate the nexus between the development percentage of traffic contribution on the roadways. And we based this on the number of parking spaces in the Heavenly parking lot. And we used the ITE trip generation rates. So we calculated the total number of daily trips for Heavenly versus the total number of developments within that area. So the calculation is about 42% of the total trips that are associated with Heavenly development. And I should mention that this is a standardized way to calculate the fair share cost and the nexus between any developments in terms of traffic impacts and traffic generation. Although Heavenly operates 5 months per year, but the cost of the infrastructure is constant because we still need the roadways for all of the 12 months and be able to repair the pavement within this area. Next slide. So first of all, we came up with the fair share percentage, which is 42% of the total traffic within that area. And then we calculated the cost for the actual 20-year life of the pavement. And we used the 2024 unit pricing that we had for the roadway rehab. We calculated that cost with a 4% inflation, which will equate to $3.6 million. Or if you divide that annually, that will be about $181,000. And the 42% that will be associated with Heavenly will be approximately $76,274. So that is the actual cost of 20-year life of a pavement, and 42% will be allocated to Heavenly. Then we calculated the incremental cost difference with the addition of snow operations equipment. And so instead of a 20-year life, based on the research that we did, we use a 10-year life of the pavement. And the cost then will become $2.4 million. If you divide that by 10 years, that's $245,000 annually. Or the fair share cost for Heavenly with the 42% for their nexus will be about $103,011 annually. So that cost includes the additional impact of the snow operations. So without the impact of snow operation, the cost is $76,000. Then there will be about $26,000 additional cost because of snow equipment operations. So the total cost is $103,011. So that is based on the nexus of Heavenly traffic versus all of the other traffic in that neighborhood. So that is basically the methodology that we use to come up with the fair share costs.
Thank you, Mr. Najad. Mr. Irvin?
The final point I would make is, I know that this was asked to have us look at an analysis of the snowplow impacts as well as the vehicle trip impact, and to talk and try to negotiate with Heavenly. We have not reached an agreement, recognizing that this has been a hot topic issue at council for some months regarding a wide range of relationship issues with the Cal-based lodge and parking and snow removal, et cetera. There's 2 new council members here, and we need to make sure, I wanted to make sure that there was discussion from the entire new council on what policy direction the council wants us to go. So with that, we conclude our presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Irvin. Mr. Robbins?
What other businesses do we grant special permission to plow city streets in the community?
There are no other.
So Vail is requesting a special permission just for their business to do this?
Yes.
Okay. And just to clarify, the business that they want to plow for is not in the city of South Lake Tahoe? The Cal Lodge is not in the city of South Lake Tahoe. The area that they are plowing is for access to a business that is not in the city of South Lake Tahoe.
Yes, correct.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Mr. Roberts?
Yes, I think using the ITE was a great way to evaluate, the percentages and whatnot. But could you explain a little bit better how you got at the 42%? I understand it has to do with, parking spaces and occupancy. And was that based on the 5 months, or was that based on the entire year?
That is based on daily trips. So what we did was that we calculated total number of housing developments within that area. There are some other commercial developments too. So the total daily trip rates for Heavenly was then calculated and divided by the total trips within that zone. So we came up with 42% based on Heavenly's daily trip volume versus all of the other development within that area.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Any other questions, council? Mr. Bass?
Yeah, so just a couple things. So looking as well through the staff report, we also have other ancillary costs that is talking, it was just in front of me, sorry. I think it was 69,000 on a slow year and then up to 120,000 that we haven't even really talked about. So I just want to get that on the record, sorry. Oh, it's 100, man, I'm so sorry. I just had it right in front of me and it went away. But anyways, we also have costs that even in this year where we haven't made an agreement in the way that we did last year, where we had a lot of extra CSOs, we're still predicting about a cost of this year, calling it a low snow year, about 70,000. That's ancillary that isn't part of the pavement.
Correct. I worked with the police chief and the public works director to quantify the cost estimates for a heavy snow year and light snow year for the cost for providing the service to those streets, chain control, parking enforcement, et cetera.
Great. And then looking at the trips, it looks like, I think it was 1,600 is what I saw. That's kind of their max capacity, I would say, right, on a fully sold-out day. And is that 1,600 spaces or 800? Because it's 2 trips, is that why it's 16?
1,600 was the number provided by Heavenly in terms of total number of parking spaces. And the way you calculate the trip generation, you base it on the total number of spaces. There are different ways to calculate the number of trip generated by development. Usually single-family homes, there's about 1 trip per day. For resorts like Vail, IT uses the number of parking spaces. There are other factors that can be used, but the most reliable one is the number of parking spaces that they have.
Okay, and I would imagine a trip considers the in and out, right?
Yes,
Okay,
correct.
great. Thank you.
Mr. Jenkins?
I come to this conversation with some history that goes back over 20 years with the relationship between the city and Heavenly. And I must say, during my tenure here, working in a different capacity for the city, I thought the relationship was excellent. When we had issues with Heavenly, Blaise Carrick was the general manager. We would bring them to them. They would bring issues to us, and we would work out the issue. It's a little concerning to me that we talk about traffic impact fees for Heavenly, but the one thing that I see missing is what is the economic benefit of Heavenly to our city, to our businesses, to the vendors who may purchase from them. And I don't see any of that calculation because that direction was not apparently provided by the previous council, with no disrespect to them. I don't know any place else in the city where there's high traffic counts. And let me so my eye tries to focus here on my notes. There's the event center. There's Edgewood Golf Course. There are the other golf course that I don't play golf, so it doesn't. I don't ski either, and they didn't contribute to my campaign. Okay, so we'll clear all that up. But I'm concerned with the business relationship that it appears to me, and I'm not blaming our side or their side, but it doesn't look good to me. It's
Mr.
not.
Jenkins?
Yes,
I'm sorry.
please.
This is clarifying questions.
Yes.
Do you have any questions? You're making statements. These are not questions.
Well, you know what? If we can't deliberate here, and I'm going to go back what I said the last time.
We do have deliberation time. It's after public communication.
My question is, are there any other traffic impact fees that we apply to large attractions in the city limits or outside the city limits? Other than the utilities who are digging up our streets?
There are some projects for VMT. So for instance, but it's modest, the TRPA vehicle mile travels mitigation fee. But that's a relatively new.
Is that our fee?
It's paid to the TRPA as part of permits, but the city does not have its own transportation fee for other projects. You're welcome.
So that's my question for now.
Thank you. Mr. Robbins?
I'll just follow up on that question. Are there any businesses within the city limits of South Lake Tahoe that generate significant traffic whose taxes do not flow to the city?
No.
Right. So every other business that generates significant amounts of traffic pays their within the city limits, pays their taxes to the city.
May I ask you a question when you're finished?
Right. So that's just where I want to go. I'll save the rest for clarify. I have one additional clarifying question for the chief, for the fire chief, but I'll save it to the discussions.
Are there any other clarifying questions for staff?
Yes, and it goes back to the fine question that the Councilman Robbins raised. His point is that because they are outside the city limits, that they are not paying taxes to us because of property. I would like to see them in the city limits, and I support annexation. I don't get to vote, but I support annexation. So the question is, though, do not they purchase products from our business community that generates us, that pay sales tax, and again, do we have any way of determining what that economic benefit is from their presence in the community? Or the reverse of that question is, what would we lose if they weren't here? Do we know that?
How would they leave?
I don't know. They go to Nevada.
I'm sure there are indirect sales that occur from patrons that go to Heavenly Cow Lodge, that spend the night in hotels and motels in town, that go shop at restaurants and retail establishments and pay for dinners and lunches and breakfast. Guaranteed that happens. I don't know what that number is, but it does happen.
Are there any further clarifying questions? Okay, we'll move on to public comment. Is there anyone in the room that would like to make public comment? I think we probably will have some. Mr. Edelman.
Good evening, Mayor Wallace and council members. My name is Shadar Edelman, Vice President and General Manager at Heavenly Mountain. Thank you for the agenda item tonight regarding snow removal on city streets near the resort. Today, I request that City Council direct staff to pursue an agreement with Heavenly to provide enhanced snow removal service on these streets like we have in years past. I request that this direction include the opportunity to discuss details of the agreement with city staff, including financial and legal terms and assumptions, as well as recognition of the in-kind contributions that Heavenly Mountain Resort provides for these services. It's going to snow, hopefully starting next week. There's a lot of winter season left, both this year and beyond. Our additional snow removal service is mutually beneficial for safe access to city neighborhoods and public lands for our residents and guests. You have heard support for this position from many community stakeholders, including Ski California, the Lake Tahoe Visitor Authority, and the South Lake Tahoe Lodging Association, as well as other local business owners and residents. I thank those that have written letters and those that have been and are in the room here tonight and last year. Please let us plow. We want to rebuild a strong, productive relationship with the city and hope that this can be the start of that process. Our actions and investment in the experience show our strong community presence and partnership, including the implementation of reservations-based parking and additional investment in shuttle services between the Heavenly Village, many lodging properties, and all base areas across city, county, and state lines. I thank the members of City Council who have taken the time to speak with me and for the time and efforts of city staff. Our leadership team and I are committed to successfully concluding this agreement and continuing to find ways to work with all of you to achieve the shared interest priorities laid out by Mayor Wallace and the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edelman. Mr. Bendel.
Thank you, Mayor Wallace and City Council members. My name is Jared Bendel. I'm representing the Lake Tahoe Visitors Authority as well as the South Lake Tahoe Lodging Association. At its November 14th, 2024 board meeting, The Lake Tahoe Visitors Authority Board of Directors heard a presentation on the ongoing discussions regarding Heavenly Mountain Resort's past snow removal operations. In December 2024, the South Lake Tahoe Lodging Association heard a similar presentation. Both boards unanimously voted to continue to encourage more conversation and negotiation between Heavenly and the city on this topic. Heavenly has provided this service for many years at no cost to the city, and does so with a level of thoroughness and expertise that is critical to the access to public lands. These services have resulted in safer roadways that serve our community and the resort, especially on heavy snowfall days and during peak periods. For the 2024-25 period, Heavenly has implemented a robust, augmented free shuttle service with stops west of Ski Run Boulevard on Highway 50, servicing all area properties. Visitors' use of these shuttles has already dramatically reduced personal vehicle miles traveled. We believe it's vital that these roadways remain clear for this frequent shuttle service throughout the winter season, especially during significant weather events, which we hope to see, hopefully, soon. The LTVA Board of Directors and South Lake Tahoe Lodging Association encourage both the city and Heavenly to continue expeditiously negotiating, keeping in mind that our mutual goal is to provide a world-class winter destination experience and positively impacting our tourism economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bendel. Is there anyone else in the room that would like to speak on this topic? Ms. O'Hare.
Hi, good evening, Council. My name's Kelly O'Hare, and I've lived across the street from Heavenly and down the street from Heavenly for more than 20 years. And I would just like to encourage you to consider a larger impact that they have on the neighborhood. The cars coming to Heavenly get lost. For years, we've asked for a sign that says not a through road that goes up the end of Heavenly. We've never been able to get it. They're looking for the gondola, but they found the tram. And there's a lot of ice, and so the impact is of the cars driving there as well as the weather really impacts the neighborhood. The employees park on the other side of Saddle Road, which goes down to Ski Run, and it's lined up every morning with employee parking. And so to limit it to this very finely defined area that they've got as what they take care of doesn't really seem fair to the city. I've walked in that area for more than 20 years. I've called the police department many times for theft of Heavenly property that I've witnessed, for medical emergencies. A couple of days ago for a car that went off a cliff off Keller Road down the hillside. Everybody that responds to that is South Lake Tahoe City and Fire. It's never been the Sheriff's Department or the Highway Patrol. I've seen the Highway Patrol there one time in 20 years. And so I think they have a greater impact, and I would encourage you to expand that area in your negotiations with them to be greater than this very narrowly defined small set of streets. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. O'Hare. Is there anyone else? Mr. Wallace.
Dwayne Wallace, South Tahoe Chamber. Our chamber board did discuss this, but we did not take a position on it. However, from a historical standpoint, I precede you just by a little bit, Mr. Jenkins. I was in the room when these were negotiated with Stan Hansen. And what Heavenly wanted was a chance to recoup their investment and not have to pay lift taxes. And at the time, there were some council members that were licking their chops to try to get a per person tax, and they were concerned about that. So everybody agreed in a negotiation to not have that. I actually was the person who promoted Measure A and was responsible for getting that redevelopment portion passed. So I have a little bit of history there. However, it's real simple. You're in a negotiation. And the negotiation is they need something, they want to be able to plow. You need to recoup and keep your budget safe and sound. So everybody can benefit, everybody benefits from each other. So it's just a matter of saying, if you'd like to be annexed, gosh, we'll cover the cost because you're in our city. If you don't want to be annexed, then we're going to charge you what it costs our city for you to be here. It's really not that complicated. And it's a hard thing to do in the public, negotiate like that. But that's all it is, it's just a simple negotiation. So keep in mind that everybody benefits one way or another. We supply the housing that they need in order to fill their ski area, and they supply the ski area that helps us fill the housing. So we're in agreement with LTVA and lodging that we encourage you to negotiate, but we also are not telling you to give away the moon because budgets are tight nowadays and you need to recoup your costs. And I agree with Kelly, Ms. O'Hare, when they had a fire in the locker room at Heavenly recently, the city got there first, and they almost always get there first because they're closer. But while they're there, what's happening to a citizen in another part of town that needs them because our services are sometimes scarce? So just keep that in mind as you negotiate in good faith. Don't sell us down the river like they did 20 years ago. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. Is there anyone else in the room? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to Zoom.
Yeah, we do have one hand raised. We're going to try our Zoom platform again. Caller 220.
Hello, can you hear me, Sue?
Yes, we can hear you. Yay, go ahead.
Okay, Ed Moser. I got a slight flu bug, so I'm not there for my safety and yours.
We missed you.
What I would just like to mention here is I don't live up there. I live in Lakeside Park, and I'm not up there maybe once or twice all the winter. But what I'd like to put my 2 cents in about is, the Heavenly Village shops. Yes, they're in the city, but we ended up, they didn't have to provide parking or anything, and we paid to build a parking garage. And for a number of years, we ended up having to pay $50,000 a year for enforcement across the street and the Crescent B Center parking lot and stuff. So that's in the city. But also, we don't charge folks in Myers or Nevada side that drive through the town to do business or pleasure on a daily basis, many of them. And that's 12 months out of the year, not 5. Also, I kind of, with the numbers here of 10 to 15% degradation of the road, losing the road life per year, streets in my neighborhood here haven't been repaved or resealed or anything in the 30 years I've been here. And from all I can understand from residents that have been here longer, since it was paved in 1970. I mean, we still have street, except the plows do dig up and take chunks out of the edges. So I don't know about the 10%, 15% a year of life taken away, because otherwise we'd be like 3 feet down into the sand by now. So I think that, if they're doing the plowing, to have to make them pay for degradation of the streets when people from out of town, like I said, Myers, Nevada side, drive through our town constantly 12 months out of the year. So I don't know if that's a fair part of the agreement. So I would just, if they want to plow and are doing that, that's great. That's saving the city a great deal of money and time and effort, and also, the cost of maintaining the machinery and the plows to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. No additional callers, Mayor.
Thank you. I'll bring it back to council. Really quickly, I just want to point out that people who drive through the community are driving through on Highway 50, and that is a Caltrans road, not a city road. So, Mr. Robbins.
Yeah. The way I see this, there's sort of a few sort of concurrent sets of arguments here as to why Vail Corporation should get special dispensation. One is about safety. The other one as to why that they shouldn't be part of the city is a question of what services of value do they get from the city. And then lastly is a set of arguments along the lines of we're special, so we shouldn't need to be part of the city. And I just want to walk through these one at a time. As far as the first question, we should plow, Heavenly says they should plow the streets for safe access. Could staff speak to whether or not, since we terminated the parking agreement and there's now many fewer cars trying to park on the steep streets of Ski Run, has the car safety situation gotten better or worse in the last year so far?
It's been a lighter snow year, obviously, but I think the calls for service that our police department generated compared to last year was at least half less year to date.
I mean, last year was a light snow year too.
And so
It was, certainly.
I think that answers your question.
It wasn't as light, but it was not a big snow year last year.
If I could add, the
Yeah.
city crew already plows all of these roadways.
Correct.
So what Heavenly does is supplemental work. So we go through all of the roadways, we plow them, we sand them, we snow blow all of the roadways. So the city crew does all of that work. Heavenly is supplemental work.
There's no savings, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. There's no savings because we're still gonna do our routes the same way we were gonna do them. We're not, as Mr. Moser said, we'd be saving money. We're not.
So as far as a safety issue goes, the data so far, which is all the data we have, is that the real improvement seems to have come from not having cars parking on Ski Run Boulevard. That seems to have made a real safety improvement in that whole area, because you don't have people backing out where we used to. The other item that comes out is, well, Vail's not part of the city, and they shouldn't be, because what thing of value do they get from the city? Aside from the obvious, well, 300 odd parking spaces was something that they can get from the city. A more deep question is about the city services that are currently being provided to Cal Lodge, currently free of charge, because none of the tax revenue, none of the sales taxes from any of the $15 hot chocolates are going to city coffers to pay for police, fire, any kind of public safety, roadworks. The every hat sold, every overpriced beer, every expensive hamburger, not 1 cent of sales taxes on that goes into the city coffer. Back in November, and I guess this is a question for Chief Drennan, back in November, there was a fire at Cal Lodge. And could you describe what happened and specifically what unit was first to arrive on the scene?
Let's see, back in November, we did respond for a report of a structure fire at Heavenly Base Lodge. The way our agreements work on the South Shore is that we operate without boundary, meaning closest unit response, right? So I don't think the taxpayer cares whose name is on the door. They want the closest fire engine and ambulance to arrive, right? So Engine 1, obviously being at the corner of Ski Run and Pioneer, and Battalion 3, both located in that station, were first on scene, followed by Truck 2, Engine 3, and Engine 6. I might have the order off, but it's close enough. They got there within minutes of each other. So the first alarm would have included 3 engines, a truck, 2 battalion chiefs, 2 ambulances to respond to that fire because it was commercial. On arrival, they did find some smoke and a small fire, and I believe it was a locker room that was under construction. The fire was mitigated fairly quickly, but to your point, the first 2 companies definitely out of Station 1, Ski Run and Pioneer.
And I think everyone would agree that you don't mess around with jurisdictional nonsense with fires in our community. It's whoever can get there first gets there first. You don't. This is not a thing to screw around with. But to the point here of the situation that we're looking at, not 1 dime of tax revenue from Cal Lodge has ever gone to fund our fire department. Not 1 dime ever in the history of the city of South Lake Tahoe from that business has ever gone to fund our fire department, which was the actual first to respond, which is an absolutely outrageous situation. This is not an oddity where we happen to have a fire truck at the edge of town that got to someone first one time. That station is the closest station to Cal Lodge. Last point is Heavenly is special, Vail Resorts is special because they generate benefits for the community. Every single business in our community generates benefits for our community. Every single one. From Heavenly, from the snow tubing in Myers to the stand-up paddle rental by the lake. Every single business, every restaurant, every bar, every guiding outfitter operation, every ski resort, every single hotel, every business, every single business generates benefits for the community, and every single business, without exception, generates costs to the community as well. Both benefits and costs, right? You generate benefits in the services, in the employment, in the provision of, in providing labor and income for residents, for enjoyment of the community, and costs in terms of traffic and police needs and fire needs and road infrastructure and electric, sewer, utility. Everything that is external to that business is a cost that is laid on the community as a whole, every single one. Vail is not special in that regard. They are not the only business that generates benefit for the community, and by far they are not the only one that generates a cost. The way we mitigate what's called the cost externality of businesses in this community is that every business pays taxes into the community. That funding is then used for things like police, fire, roads, except for Vail. Vail is the one major business in our community that pays nothing into our community to mitigate their costs. It is an absolute outrage. And the only way to get to Cal Lodge, other than skiing in, is through our community. They're not on the border of our town. They're in our town. So I'm frankly generally not interested in continuing these kinds of negotiations for giving Vail Resorts special treatment left and right, for messing up on our roads, for getting in our faces and taking advantage of our streets and parking their customers on our streets or any other special advantages until such time as they are annexed into the city, at which point I think it makes absolute sense to talk about all those things. When the sales taxes from those businesses are going to support the critical infrastructure that their business is relying on, that every other business in our community pays into, except for them.
Thank you, Mr. Robbins. Mr. Bass.
Most of those points I can agree with. I think that also, though, as I asked to have this item brought back, I think public safety is of concern. We do want to make things work. And so I think I want to also talk a little bit about how we got here, which is really from 3 winters ago when we did have serious issues on Ski Run Boulevard, and we came together to realize we need to have a partnership. We need to work together to manage the flow in and out of the Cal Lodge, especially in those kind of years. And that's really where this whole thing began. But when we went down that road, it quickly became known that, from previous administrations, councils, that there was really not reasonable compensation coming back to the city for what we were putting out and really what we learned that we need to be putting out. It was a $10,000 a year parking agreement for that, and that was not reasonable at any level. And so we began discussions with Mr. Fortune at the time, and really it did just start about the main lodge. Let's look at the main lodge becoming part of the city. We know the history around the Killebrews in 65 when the city was born, and we really thought, both of us at the time, that moving forward and trying to go forward in an annexation process to bring the main lodge into the city was good for all, because those tax dollars still go and are being paid by Vail. They're just going to the county that doesn't provide any service because they can't, because you're surrounded by the city. So it just practically makes all the sense in the world that an annexation to move them into the city would make sense. It's so much better for them. Now they're sending their check to a different address, but they get all of these different services. As we headed down that road, some things changed that included maybe looking at the whole Forest Service area of Heavenly on the California side, and that may have started to startle Vail or whatever happened there. But regardless, what we started to hear from Vail is we don't know what annexation means. We don't understand the benefits of what this is going to provide. And for me, that was frustrating because 2 years ago, we put a ton of staff resources and a lot of money. We put money into the annexation process to move forward. And clearly, there was huge benefits from the following year of what I'll call the fiasco that got national publicity all throughout the country about how badly managed South Lake Tahoe was. And so, to me, I think we have to know that history to know how we're here tonight and ended up in a place that we didn't want to work with Vail because they were not coming to the table, in my opinion, in a respectful way as we worked really diligently. And so where I'm at right now, as I just said, I think that we have to pay attention to the public safety concerns in number one. And we know that in some days, 1,600 people are heading up Ski Run, and it could be a complete fiasco. I don't want to be part of that. But I also think that the only way we can do business with Vail is they need to pay for the benefits that they don't seem to understand. When they can come to us and say they don't understand the benefits of being part of the city, maybe when you write a check for them, you'll think about what you're paying for, and you can maybe realize that if you will become part of the city, that check doesn't have to be paid, and you'll probably get your parking back. And you'll probably get great signage to Heavenly on Ski Run that joins and welcomes people to the mountain. There are so many countless other benefits that come with annexation and the negotiation we can have for Heavenly. So to me, I look at this, the numbers that, thank you, Mr. Najad, I think you did a great job. And I have talked with Mr. Edelman, and I can kind of hear him out that, hey, every day isn't 1,600 cars throughout the season. We have Wednesdays that may fall below that, right? So I can reason with that. But even when I look at, even if we were to match where Mr. Edelman talked about, 21% was kind of more their agreeable term there. If we were to look at that and just on the cost of pavement rehab, normal wear and tear, cut it in half, right, we'd be right about 38,000. And then the 26,000, which is the differential due for snowplow operations, cut that in half and it's at 13,000. So we'd be at 50,000 on just payment wear and tear. I'm willing to look at something like that type of a number for this to happen for this year to move forward. That's also not adding the cost that we are experiencing for ancillary costs, which for this small snow year, maybe it's not going to be small, let's hope, but it is right now, was estimated about 63,000. On a major, is estimated about 63,000. That's just cost of staff time, police, the things that we're doing ancillary, and then it's up to over 100,000 in busy snow years. So we're not even counting that. So I feel like this is an olive branch from us to say, look, from this is just my perspective, if we're willing to take 50,000, but we're accruing way higher costs than that. Even if the pavement is the 50,000, take the 60,000, we're still, coming halfway. And the hopes is to hopefully restart the annexation conversation, and that Vail can realize, look, we won't have to write this check, because I think if we don't, I think we start to look in the future years at the real numbers here. And really start to really analyze the real numbers, and it's going to be more than 50,000. So because they seem to tell me that they don't understand the benefits, I feel like we have to make them pay for what really the benefits are.
Thank you, Mr. Bass. Mr. Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, staff, for all your work on the numbers. I think they make a lot of sense. I think this whole process seems kind of like the Hatfields and the McCoys. We're kind of arguing over things, and I think on our side, we're not getting any reimbursement for services we're providing. I think that's very valid and very strong. I also think that Heavenly's concerns for plowing, we're getting free plowing. We got more safety for our people that are going up there. Their concerns for the safety of the transit that they've provided to our city. That's a valuable asset that they've provided. And the fact that our regular schedule for snow removal is only every 12 hours in a storm. So I could see that not being enough for them up in that critical area around a very high traffic zone. So I think it's kind of a no-brainer that we allow them to plow for us. But again, there's a lot of minutia on this, and it's kind of ironic that the agenda item is actually so small. It's just about whether we continue negotiations or not. With so many aspects of it, it's kind of silly. So I really think what we should consider is directing staff on a new agreement, one that includes allowing them to plow with paying no money, the possibility of getting their parking back, removing us from the liabilities of the indemnities, but also it includes a letter approving annexation from Vail Corporation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Roberts. Mr. Jenkins.
That was very interesting, council member. And the comments that Councilmember Bass made. I don't want to see Heavenly get any special treatment. but I have wanted us to recognize what the economic benefit is. That has not been done. So it's hard to, in discussing, I would think it's hard to discussing cost and benefit without knowing the benefit. And I know that wasn't directed, staff wasn't directed to do that, but that would seem to me to be an important thing. I would imagine, and I'm coming around back to what you all said, that the Lake Valley Fire District provides services on an automatic aid system, as you described, that we provide to Heavenly, to areas that might be in the city that they're close to. Is that fair, Chief?
Yeah, that's a fair statement, for sure. We share that.
So the automatic aid system is set up that who's ever closest responds, whether it's Lake Valley or us, and that's, so there's what I think I hear is that there are other places where they provide the service to us. And that's what the fire chief said.
Whoever's closest.
Ultimately, what I think is actually needed, I don't like parking on the street at all as a general concept, and I think ultimately there needs to be a parking structure built. That's something that is for further conversation and discussion, but to get people off the streets and get them into structures that they have, and how that's financed and who does it, that would be a topic that would be you know, this whole underparking thing that we have in this city is ridiculous. People are going to park where they park if they don't have parking places to do it. I mentioned the economic benefit. Let's see, I'm trying to shorten this up, Madam Mayor. I agree that I would like to see Heavenly in the city for the reasons that Councilmember Robbins said, Councilmember Bass, and others have said. I think there's advantages, but frankly, the way this conversation has gone, if I were in their shoes, I'm not sure, I would be worried about what the next foot to fall would be. And so that issue can be resolved through pre-annexation agreements that are binding after annexation. Those kinds of things can be solved, but we got to get through this conversation first. Let's see, I'm trying to be succinct, Madam Mayor. And the other thing, I think the points that Ms. O'Hare made about keeping people out of the neighborhoods, that's exactly why I don't want them on the streets long term, because that is a problem. We need to take care of it. It's called better management of the system here. Some people don't like that term, but it's better management of our tourism base, because we can't have our locals upset because of what tourists might do, though we like them to spend their money here. The last part of this is we have not had success to date with this conversation, and maybe Councilmember Bass and Councilmember Roberts, maybe they would be a subcommittee that would work with the city manager and his team in the conversations, because I still don't completely understand the sticking points. I haven't seen the proposals from Heavenly, and not that I actually prefer not to. I hear what we're saying, but I hear what they're saying, and I would hope that maybe with a council ad hoc committee that it might help. As far as the indemnification, I'm not a lawyer. God forbid the laws doesn't need any more of them, except our fine attorney. But if we had an agreement and they have no history of problems with their snow plowing operation, they're doing it in conformance, I'm told, with our standards. There's been no accidents 2018, I'm told, by staff. I mean, whatever our exposure, but and I don't know if that's really a sticking point or not, which gets back to maybe if a council ad hoc committee was working, some of those issues could be discussed, because in the end, we're setting policy. The city council sets the policy and what's in the agreements, and it seems like the ones that have worked, there are ones that have been worked in the past. In Rotary, they say, is it what is the first one? Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Is it beneficial to all concerned? And I think if both sides would apply that standard as we look at this agreement, we want it fair for everyone, that I think that would end up in an agreement. And I would like to see a council ad hoc committee, if the mayor and the council were willing to do that, to work with staff and come back with a specific agreement.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. I'm going to go next, and then we'll go to you, Mr. Robbins. So I agree with points from every single one of you. I wholeheartedly agree with what Mr. Mr. Roberts said. That's going to kill me. One of these days.
You're going to second the wrong motion.
The couple of points that I would make based on what he said is that I think that I would be supportive of having them do the snow removal for free if, for consideration on our part, or on their part, that we would get a letter of wholehearted support for the annexation, because then it would essentially deal with all of the issues that we've been talking about. And just to further go back and do a little bit of history, when we made that agreement back in 2023, or for the 2023 year, we gave a lot in that contract with the reason of being good partners. We want to be partners with Heavenly, and we want them to be a part of our community. When you're in our community, you get the friends and family discount. We're selling cell phones now. Like I said, I support Mr. Roberts' idea of giving them free, doing the snow removal for free, not charging them, because we don't need it. We already are doing snow removal up there. And the only other thing that I would add is that I do believe that we need to be fully indemnified, because just because something hasn't happened, it doesn't mean it won't. And we are protecting the citizens of South Lake Tahoe. And if something happens and we become responsible for something they did, that is not a good use of our citizens' funds. So, Mr. Robbins, you can go now.
Yeah, I was going to say that, again, also I agree with Councilmember Roberts, is that, you know, I don't oppose parking on Ski Run as a concept. You know, parking on streets is not a concept I have any fundamental objection to, nor do I have any fundamental objection to the concept of plowing roads of snow. That's not what's at issue. What's at issue is that we are giving a singular benefit to a mega corporation that is not paying their fair share into our community. And that's the problem, is that the exchange is inequitable, not that the underlying thing being asked for is somehow abhorrent. It's not. So I would be prepared to support Councilmember Roberts' position of saying, look, we do need proper legal indemnification of plowing. Would be included for Heavenly, and I'm supportive also of re-entering equitable negotiations for a parking agreement on Ski Run under the condition of support that is, written, delivered to the correct people, and sustained through the process of annexation. And if there's support for that, I think I have a motion in mind to do that. I won't make it just yet, but I'm just saying, I think I have a motion that I can put together to express that. But I'm happy to let us wrap up our conversation. I just want to let you guys know, I think I have a structure to put that together.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Robbins. Mr. Bass.
Yeah, so I think Mr. Roberts, what he spoke about is exactly where we've been trying to get to. And so I really hope that they will write a letter of support, that they want to move forward with the annexation. We've been trying to get that since Tom was here. So yes, that would be our ultimate goal, 100%. Now I wonder, Do we want to say, because again, there's also the whole idea that, you know, yes, they're supporting annexation going forward. Well, there's a lot of avenues to go down in annexation where annexation may not happen. And so and again, maybe all of a sudden this does change and they send a letter, but do we want to say you either, if you're not going to go forward with annexation, then we would take a check for $50,000 just for snow removal, which is the 21% of this cost, so that it's kind of balls in their court, and it also leaves our city manager not negotiating. It gives him two tracks. It's either it's this or it's that, and then therefore it's not opening up negotiations. It's saying one or the other. Because again, I do feel and agree that leaving the snowmaking to not, the snow removal, I would not like to see that happen. I think that it could create a public safety issue and hinder the neighbors and locals and a lot of other people. So I want to try to find a way there and not just because if we just give the direction to go for only that annexation letter and they don't do that, then we're just leaving it without an option for them to do anything, if you get what I'm saying. So I think having both in the motion is not a bad idea.
I think just leaving it honestly is probably okay. Let me ask Mr. Jad to follow up, because on just a comment from earlier, which was how was the frequency with which we would plow ski run and the access roads. We haven't had a really big storm yet this season, but if we had a more sustained storm, with what frequency would those roads be plowed? It's getting late, sorry.
No problem.
Would those plows be roaded,
Our standard operating procedure is to deploy 2 plows in every neighborhood during the nighttime and 1 plow in the morning. So every 12 hours, we will hit all of the roadways.
And major arteries, would they get plowed like ski run? Would that get a little more frequency than every 12 hours?
Typically 12 hours, I think, is the standard that we use.
Okay.
Depends on, the storm conditions. If we have a lot of ice buildup, we put sanding. So we start the operation with sanding in the morning, early in the morning. Then we go and through the process in terms of plowing the roadways. But typically about 12 hours, we hit all of the streets and we come back again depending on the snowfall and how much snow we get.
Okay. And so far this season, we've seen a lot fewer, bearing in mind that last season was maybe only slightly snowier, but it's reasonably comparable, I think it's fair, to this season. So, that we've seen a marked decrease in calls for accident service, police service, and stuff in that area. Is that reasonable? I mean, it's been icy. We've had some snow, just not as much as 2 years ago.
Yes, we haven't had as much snow, but, again, we respond to the conditions of the roadway. And if there's ice buildup, we'll send the sanders and we mitigate that.
It seems that I think a lot of the safety improvement, my read on the situation, for what it's worth, and I guess this is a question if you concur, is that a lot of the safety improvement has come by eliminating the street parking there, without cars pulling out backwards and trying to park on that street, sideways. Would you think that would be a major reason why safety has improved in that area?
Yes, but in addition to that, we have also implemented with the support of the PD, the chain control system. We have a program in terms of coordination between the Public Works and the PD. And so it's a daily communication to make sure that we close the roadways. So there's a number of initiatives that we have taken last 2 years to reduce the crashes and improve the road conditions.
So the evidence that we have, right, which is all we have so far is what we've experienced, is that as a public safety matter, which was part of what we're discussing here, is plowing as a public safety matter, is that we've seen a marked improvement between last year's arrangement and this year's arrangement. Not a decrease in public safety, an increase in public safety.
Is that a motion, Mr. Robbins?
So with that, I am prepared to structure a motion if we're okay, if we feel comfortable going to a motion.
You can go ahead. I personally, though, without having another option, don't want to just leave this hanging, because I'm pretty sure that there's a very good chance that Vail's not ready to put a support letter of annexation, and then we're just leaving it with nothing. And I think that it'd be nice to have 2 tracks for our city manager personally with clear direction.
but we're doing fine at the moment, is that's where I'm at.
We've had about, I don't know, we've had, I don't know, 3 to 4 storms this year, barely any, very little snowfall. And when you look at the needs coming out of the main lodge down Needle Peak, they do need to be there at 7:30 a.m. before you get mass traffic. And we can't guarantee that we're gonna be there because that's not our flow. So again, I just like having the both options. You either support annexation, or if you wanna do this, you pay $50,000, which was what they said, 21%. That's what Mr. Edelman said was their impacts on our roads. So to me, it's just giving 2 options, which I think.
Our estimate was 42%, not 20%.
Exactly, so I'm just saying if we
Why are we
meet them, I'm trying to be a partner also to say that, look, if we can do that, then, because again, I also probably know in dealing with them, I don't know that we're gonna get back from corporate their support or not, especially with some of the news that's come out as of recent, so it's kind of.
There for a shakeup at the moment.
Well, so even if that's not the case, or it is the case, regardless, I think having 2 options for the city manager and having clear direction could be
I'm
good.
uncomfortable with giving them a 50% discount off of the city's estimated price. I'll tell you that. I don't see why, that's giving them something special for a company that's not sending us any of our taxes. So I'll go ahead and, I'll split the difference, is that I'll suggest a motion offering that we engage in negotiation for both parking and the plowing contingent upon support for written support for annexation. Or, and I'm not comfortable with this, but I'll as a negotiation board, or allow for negotiations based upon the price structure presented in the report, which is the 42%. I'm just not keen on supporting a big discount and saying we're gonna do this out of the goodness of our heart when we've gotten the runaround from Vail for so many months. They've chosen not to negotiate in good faith, so.
I feel you there, but I also do think that there's logic in thinking about 1,645.
There was no
You know, there's 1,645 parking spots, right? So they're not full all 5 months. Every 5-month day, it's probably full 3 to 4 days a week, not every week. So that's why I'm willing to concede to the 21%. And I think that's what Mr. Edelman, so again, my point here is to try to get somewhere and not leave us hanging. And I also just want to have really clear direction for the city manager.
Here's my motion,
Okay,
because I want to get something out here.
please.
All right. I move to provide direction to staff to negotiate a snow removal agreement with Heavenly based on the Exhibit A cost structure as presented, or to provide or to negotiate with Heavenly to provide a properly indemnified snow removal agreement at 0 cost, along with entering into negotiations for an equitable parking agreement under the explicit condition that it include adequately written support for annexation.
Okay,
Is
we have
that,
a motion.
my question to staff is that adequately clear direction? Because you said you wanted to make sure you got clear direction. Is that clear enough?
I understand what
You-
Okay,
Okay, good. That's what I was asking.
so there's a motion. Is there a second?
I'd like to discuss, I guess for purposes of.
I'll second it, and then we'll go to discussion. Okay, it's seconded. Now, Mr. Jenkins.
I'm glad we're having this conversation, but I was told explicitly that the issue of annexation was not on the agenda. And so I want the standard that's applied to us when we're having discussion to be the same. But I'm perfectly happy with this conversation, though I think Council Member Bass giving the manager some options it gives him some flexibility that otherwise he doesn't have. And unless the other party agrees that that concept is, there's really no point in doing it. So giving him some leeway, I think, is a good idea. That's my comment.
I would just comment that, one, we're not talking about the annexation, we're talking about going into negotiation for an annexation, and I think that's sort of the split of the hair. But my understanding is that it's a negotiation, And that means we can go up to the amount that's in the thing, but the city manager has the ability to come back to council and present a different option, and we have the chance to vote on it at that time. So with that, we have a motion and a second for Mr. Robbins, and so.
I knew you were gonna get.
So I'm gonna do it every time.
Keith, you and I are just gonna merge, that's all there is to it.
It would make,
So, but I guess the only
That'd
thing,
be
I
a
mean,
strange-
you just threw me off a little bit, Ms. Wallace, on what you're saying, because we're not asking our city manager to go back and negotiate with Mr. Edelman a different price. We're sticking, this motion's sticking to the price of the full 42% cost.
I heard based on.
So are we not, I mean, because
based on the
that was my
figures
kind of point, was not to send our city manager in with, there's no negotiation, it's either this choice or it's that choice.
I would just posit that if you say we're gonna go 50%, then that is a bad negotiation tactic. We can negotiate.
I certainly won't,
And,
I certainly
and
won't
you
vote on
see
it.
my point?
I do, I just was trying to get to where we're going, so we're not coming back to council after we have 3
Well,
snowstorms
but we
in
have to come
February.
back to council to approve the contract. So real quick, let's vote on this item.
Does
And
the-
then we can discuss if we need to go further.
Does the city manager have flexibility to come back with something different that in his professional judgment, he thinks marries all of these variety of opinions? I would hope he has that, is what I think Councilmember Bass was saying, that he has some flexibility, so we don't put him in a box, so we lose, or they lose, or everyone loses. I don't want to come back again and keep talking about the thing with nothing done.
I agree with that. I think based on the motion I heard, it says based on Exhibit A, which does not lock us into the rate, the highest rate in that. I need clarity on that. If that is the motion, that's the ceiling of the city's
Yes.
dollar amount,
And if you come back at half that amount, I'll probably vote no, but feel free to come back at half that amount if that's the best you get.
that sounds fair to
You guys
me.
have never negotiated, have you? You're killing me. Let's
You're killing
please
me,
vote. Really,
Smalls.
you're killing me, Smalls. Let's please vote.
Whatever we can take.
You,
So the city manager can come back with what he professionally thinks is the right thing to do based on the conversation, as I understand it. The motion includes that.
okay.
If I may, Madam Mayor, really
Yes.
quick, I agree that annexation and parking wasn't on that agenda item. It was tangential because it's all commingled, but just want to state a couple things in the spirit of good faith negotiations that I'm going to be walking into with Mr. Edelman now. The two things for everyone's knowledge, the annexation action has been taken by the council. And we are currently in AB 8 negotiations with El Dorado County on property and sales tax negotiations. When that is final, that would be brought back to council at a later date. And the second thing is that there was some comments that Heavenly does not pay taxes in the city. They do, just not from this location. And I want to make sure that that's fair and that we all recognize that they are a sales tax payer at another location.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Irvin, for that clarification. With that, we are going to take we'll come back at 8:30. I've been requested a break, and we still have another meaty item.
Mayor, that was consent.
Ready when you are, Mayor. Take us home.
Back to order. Moving on to item number 8, local tenant preference policy for affordable housing. Ms. Wackenhut Lamelli.
Good evening, Mayor, Council member, staff. Jessica Wackenhut Lomelli, Housing Manager with the city. At the City Council meeting on November 7th, 2023, staff presented a local preference proposal framework. At the May 7, 2024 City Council meeting, Resolution 2024-053 was passed authorizing the city manager to enter into a professional services agreement with RSG Inc. to conduct a disparate impact analysis. The disparate impact analysis analyzed demographic trends in comparable jurisdictions to understand if a local preference policy for affordable housing would create a disparate impact to protected classes. Today, I'd like to introduce Tara Matthews, principal with RSG Inc., who conducted the disparate impact analysis and will provide a presentation on the findings now.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Thank you for the introduction. Tara Matthews with RSG. I'm going to go through a brief presentation. Jessica gave a good background of kind of how we got here today, but just kind of a recap. RSG was tasked with evaluating whether or not a local tenant preference policy for affordable housing projects within the community would have a disparate impact and would not have a discriminatory impact on any protected groups within the jurisdiction. We analyzed numerous data points within our research and market data and compared that to nearby jurisdictions. That included El Dorado County, Douglas County, and then the unincorporated communities of Myers and Tahoma. Our research found that there were 6 primary data points that would support the creation of a local tenant preference policy. The first one was that the population within the city of South Lake Tahoe is declining. There was no finding that there was a disproportionate impact on protected classes. However, we are seeing an increase of the senior population as well as non-minority groups as well. The second factor that we found was that the labor force in general is declining, and that's largely within those service-based industries for accommodations and food service. And we're considering labor force being anyone in that kind of like 20 to 65-year-old range. Additionally, the labor force residency is declining, so 1 in 5 people are commuting into your jurisdiction to work within the city of South Lake Tahoe. We found that there are, it's kind of coming up in tonight, so I kind of feel like I'm repeating some things you guys have been discussing already, but there's a lot of home vacancies within the city. I know that's been a topic that you've all spoken previously. Amongst the jurisdictions that and areas that we looked at, it's the second largest. While many of these factors are occurring in these other areas, and they're regional issues, there is a little bit higher percentage here, and a majority of that is largely due to those seasonal vacancies. The amount and the number of rental occupied units, or rental units for renters to move into, that is declining as well, so there's just less options for those that want to work and live here and rent housing. There's just less options. And then just the general housing cost burden. So housing cost burdens typically defined by spending more than 30% of your income on housing is increasing. So it is for both renters and owners within the jurisdiction. On average, are spending more than that 30% on housing cost. In summary, we found that the population is decreasing. The labor force is moving out. The housing vacancies in general is increasing the number of units that are available for folks, and this housing costs are continuing to rise. And that's a statewide issue, but it's particularly felt within your community due to the lack of supply of housing. So as a result, South Lake Tahoe is experiencing displacement pressures that are negatively affecting, in particular, the lower wage earning individuals, as well as those protected classes that I mentioned that are currently residing in your community. And a local tenant preference policy is a way to ensure that those employees and those residents are able to stay within the city of. So we found that there is a need for a policy and that it wouldn't violate any fair housing laws or anything like that. And so we then took a look at some other jurisdictions that have similar policies that you're interested in potentially adopting. And we looked at, how could you apply it, and then what are some potential limitations of such policy. The key takeaways from our research is it's legally allowed, as long as there's no disparate impact, of which we found there would not be. That it can only be applied to the order of priority on a wait list. So I'll explain that a little bit more. So this is for affordable housing projects, and typically in the documents that are prepared there, the property management company has to prepare like a tenant selection plan or property management plan where they can have a wait list to go into that type of housing. So this policy is only applied to those wait lists. The length of time a resident or employee has been working within the jurisdiction cannot be one of the factors. And HUD approval, I know here it says must, that should say may be required if the policy also applies to any projects that have federal funding. That is a shifting target at the moment. So based on our research, we recommended that a local tenant preference policy with the proposed definition of local be adopted, which includes one member of the household either residing currently within the jurisdiction or has had recent residency within the jurisdiction but has been displaced due to cost, or works within the jurisdiction with a minimum of at least 20 hours within the jurisdiction, or has an offer to work within the jurisdiction.
So the policy that was included in the council's packet has been written consistent with the findings and the disparate impact analysis that Tara just presented on, and it's broad enough to be implemented within the city. To highlight the presentation from the findings in the disparate impact analysis and the policy, I'm going to share some examples of who would not qualify under the current local preference policy as drafted. Someone working for the Lake Tahoe Unified School District 28 hours a week but living in State Line, Nevada would qualify for this preference. Someone working at Heavenly Resort and living in Myers would not qualify. Someone living in Gardnerville and working at one of the casinos would not qualify unless they lived within the city in the past 10 years. Someone living in the Black Bart neighborhood and working at Camp Richardson would also not qualify. This policy would be applicable to projects moving forward through negotiation and an agreement with the different developers within the city. Today, staff is asking City Council to pass a resolution adopting the local preference policy for affordable housing. And I'll pass it off to Ms. Stroud for a minute as well.
Thank you. And I just wanted to let council know that Mr. Thomas, Ms. Wackenhut-Lamelli, and I met with some representatives from the Sugar Pine company related today, and they did have some concerns or really requested edits just to make clear that this policy is prospective and not retroactive, and specifically because they have closing on a financing happening imminently, and didn't want that to get delayed or any confusion caused because of the state and federal funding that's going into that, with having to determine whether this policy applies. So we understand their concern, and we are willing to recommend some changes to the resolution that's in your packet to address them. All these changes are related to that one concern. So it would be adding a second section in the resolution on the first page that says the city council declares that the local tenant preference policy shall be effective in 60 days. So that would give time for that funding to close, and we don't have any other active projects that would be coming in that time, so that wouldn't impact anything else. And then to the policy itself, a couple of changes to Section A of the policy, which is attachment 1 to the resolution, so that it would read, to the extent permissible under applicable state and federal law and in compliance with the requirements of any federal or county funding for an affordable housing development, and then continuing as currently written.
Where was that change? Sorry.
To Section A of the policy, of the resolution.
Oh, of the resolution, okay.
And then to Section B, so that it would read, this policy shall apply to all developers, owners, and their agents, successors and assigns, and property managers of an affordable housing development in one of the categories listed above, for which construction financing closes after the effective date of this policy. This policy shall not apply to any affordable housing development where implementation of the tenant preference would conflict with existing financing documents, agreements, or restrictions, unless all affected parties execute amendments to any such existing financing documents or agreements. And then it would continue as written currently.
Thank you, Ms. Stroud. Does that complete your? Okay, thank you. Mr. Robbins?
Yeah, would actually just wanted to go over that again because I kind of couldn't find where you were starting for some of those, but I'll hold that for a second. I just want to clarify a question. You gave an example earlier of someone who lives in Myers and works at Heavenly for more than 20 hours would not qualify. Would that include if, say, they were a lift op at the gondola base?
That's a good question. We'd have to look into it because there's so many different factors in the policy, right? So it depends on if they lived in the city, some of those things. But I think as Heavenly as their employer, it may not qualify, but that's something that we did discuss is, does the business need to be located within the city limits or not?
Does the business need to be, right? Because a business generally has an address on file of record. I think Heavenly's address on file is like Nevada. I'm not sure. I'm saying I think that, I'm not sure about that. I have low confidence in that.
So the policy currently states that the employer is based in the city of South Lake Tahoe.
Right, but I don't know what that means. In some cases, that's obvious. In the case of Heavenly, which operates in the city, the county, and a different state, all at the same time, I'm not sure what that means to be based in the city of South Lake Tahoe.
I know their business license comes from the county, so I assume that they're.
I don't know.
Well, we know that from just looking at their seller's permit is going to the county, so you have to assume that the address they're using is the main lodge. I just have to assume that.
Or if their job is to be lift ticket sales at gondola base, that's very clearly in the city.
But I don't know that
But you may work there one day, you may work somewhere else, you may get moved around, especially if you're a lift op or a maintenance guy.
Yeah, the policy is based on where the employer is based, not where the employee is working. So you might have, for example, a construction company that's in Minden, and their employees are up here, but that doesn't mean they would qualify under the employment section because the business is not here.
I believe Cody is right that one way or another, they're at least not in the city. I thought they might have officially, but they might have a California business address that's on the county. I don't know. I poke into that only because it's a major employer in the region, not because I'm trying to get on Heavenly's case. That was the last agenda item.
Mr. Robbins, it looks like Mr. Thomas has something.
Yeah.
I was going to echo exactly what Ms. Stroud said. It's written as based in. Yeah.
Okay.
We also considered examples where you have a delivery driver that delivers.
That's a fair point. Yeah.
Everywhere. Maybe they deliver some in the city, but if that
it may not count.
Company, yeah.
Because you're
Correct.
got it. Just was trying to understand that minutia. Okay. You covered the question I was going to ask about the item on report page 21 about we're not allowed to include as a factor of prioritization length of time in residency or employment, right? Either one, neither residency nor employment in the area can be used to like further subdivide a ranking. That's just not allowed under the federal rules.
Yes, correct.
Okay. All right. I may have more questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Robbins. Mr. Jenkins?
Thank you. I did push the button this time. So for clarity, I assume that the local preference policy proposed, while to others, but first and foremost, it applies to existing working locals and existing senior citizens in need who have to get on a list, that we need to establish a list. Am I correct?
So your question is, so it's inclusive of people who are living here, who were displaced from the city, or are working within the city? And that's
Yes, I would
inclusive
say
of
both, yeah,
seniors.
because I know of both types.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you. I want to ask that. Tangentially, as we've had a couple items tangential to the main item, I favor the local preference policy. I know the city of Berkeley has such a policy in place that they, after doing the disparate, in fact, I think that's where, at least in my mind, where an example was given of that. I think it's good. I think it's reassuring to the community. My question, the tangential question is I'd like to see in addition to what we do, an effort made to get the other jurisdictions in the basin to do their part and not expect that we're going to do the whole part. And I'd like to see TRPA maybe lead that example, Mr. TRPA representative, and I think overall it would help the availability of housing if all jurisdictions, Douglas County, El Dorado, Placer, what's the other one, Washoe, and maybe there's another one I forgot. So, no, I'm delighted that I wish this had applied to Phase 1 Sugar Pine, but what is, and as Scott would say, you know that.
Better late than never.
Yeah, better late than never. Thank you, Scott.
Mr. Robbins?
Yeah, sorry, I remembered the
No.
question, I forgot.
Go ahead.
The question was about, so obviously this can't retroactively apply to Sugar Pine Phase 1, which already has 58 units occupied out of 64, I believe.
53?
53 units, sorry, that's almost an 8, out of 64 units. So that won't apply to presumably all of Phase 1, which has applications for all of those units and then some. But can you address whether or not this would apply in a timely way, if this is timely enough to apply to the applications for Phase 2 and for, rather than their weirdo numbering system, the third and fourth phase? Because it's the numbering of the phases is it's 1A, 2B, 3B, whatever it is. The first, second, third, and fourth. I don't know why we couldn't just call them Phase 1, 2, 3, and 4, but here we are. Could you address whether or not what parts of Sugar Pines this will apply to, and what part the developer might be willing to apply them to, even if it goes beyond requirements?
Great question. So this policy would need to be implemented through agreements with the developers, and we haven't entered into any of those agreements with any of the developers. I will say that we got the latest numbers for Sugar Pine Village 2 for the first phase, and at least 90% of the occupants of those 53 units are people that are residing within South Lake Tahoe. And so we know that with the parameters of this local preference policy that the numbers would be higher because there could be people living in Gardnerville, working here, moving up. And so I would say for the first few phases of Sugar Pine, it's we still have to negotiate through those agreements.
And I would just add to that, if council accepts the changes that were requested by Related that staff is fine with, it would be clear that the policy only applies to projects in the future that haven't closed on financing. So that would cover not just phase one, but the phase that will be leased this fall, which already has.
Second phase.
Yes, and then the third one, which the financing is closing hopefully in days.
So it might not apply, we would expect it to not apply until the fourth phase of Sugar Pines.
Based on being able to negotiate an agreement, that it would apply then,
And,
yes.
and just, let me backtrack one quick step, because at staff meeting on Monday, which as I recall was yesterday, the number of units occupied in Sugar Pines was 51 per my notes. It's 53 now?
So as of.
Did it literally go up 2 units overnight?
As of Friday was 51, as of Monday was 53, so two
right.
more over the weekend.
Okay.
At a 90% residency, local residency rate.
I have crossed out 51 and written 53 in my notebook.
It changed in 2 days.
Thank you.
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Robbins. I'm going to ask a really quick question. Under the tenant preference as a solution, it says must be approved by HUD field office or may, and I did hear you say may. What needs to be approved? Is it the list or the policy?
The policy.
Thank you.
Yeah, so just
go
real
ahead.
quick, it will have to go through the state too, through the HCD, Housing and Community Development
HCD.
Department, as well as HUD.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Mr. Jenkins?
Well, that last comment about the state, I'm not sure that state law applies based on conversations that I've had on other state mandates, but I'll leave that to a discussion during otherwise. I'm a little concerned with what I think I heard, that the preference policy may not apply to phase 2 or 3 or 4. If it doesn't apply and it's for local preference, I don't know why we're doing it. And I was assured in advance of this that the only non-preference policy, because this proposal wasn't completed, would be for phase 1, but phase 2, 3, and 4 would apply. So I'm very concerned for the community that this preference policy would not apply, and maybe if the developer doesn't like it or is financing, then don't do it. If it doesn't apply to the people who live here in need, and there are many who live here in need, who didn't get on the original list for Sugar Pine, or were told that they had to get in line and then were rejected. So can you clarify? I don't understand. I thought it applied only to phase 1. Now we're saying phase 2, 3, and 4.
No.
That's what.
The request that Related had was those phases that have already entered financial agreements for financing and funding the project. This does not apply as their request because they've already closed on all the financing terms for the project phases of 2 and 3. It would not cover 4. That's what they're asking for.
But that's not our problem. It's their problem, is it not?
Well, there's a lot of spaghetti strings that would need to be unwrapped to try to negotiate that, and I'm not sure we get there.
Well,
They have a lot of different people
well,
to.
and please if just indulge me a little bit on this. If we're not building housing primarily for locals in need, people who work here in need, or others, I don't know who we're building it for. And this goes back to a conversation we've had internally. And I was assured, staff will remember the conversation, that the lack of preference only applied to phase 1. And if the people who are developing these other phases don't agree with it, that's their problem. It's not our problem. If it's not for the folks here first, then I don't understand why we're even doing it.
I can understand your frustration. I share some of it, but I don't know if we have much leverage to require them to open up the financing agreements that they've approved.
Well, nothing ventured, nothing gained. If we try, maybe
the
they would understand. Yeah, especially if they want city support of any kind from us. That's my point.
I hear you. I would state for the record, I think, these local preference policies, I think that the stats that Ms. Wackenhut shared are showing that it truly is helping locals. Not 100%, I'll recognize that. But the other thing is these preference policies are typically in place in more urban areas where there's fighting going on for critical housing, and there's cross-city boundary commerce change from one person going from home, from their home to work. We don't have a lot of competition. I recognize your point that there are employers near the South Shore region that are perhaps taking advantage of the housing we're building, and we're trying our best to secure that for locals, but that's what I'd like to add there. But I recognize your concern.
And just to add some context too, this is a very large and complicated project, and the financing that's about to close for the third phase is using city funds that were committed in 2021 before we had even talked about having this policy. So we, you know, it's hard to go back and put new requirements on something that we did.
Well,
4
again,
years
I
ago.
was reassured, I was told specifically, and I'm not blaming anybody, I'm just saying I was told specifically that the preference policy would apply to the far phase, but not to phase one. So that's where I'm kind of left, and if we have to vote on money, then that's going to be then maybe it'll be another 4-to-1 vote, but I'm very concerned now about that.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Mr. Roberts?
Yeah, I just wanted a little bit of clarification on the preference. You have your limitations, it says prioritize wait list only. I'm wondering if that has any accommodation for different demographics. I know your impact study studied a couple of different industries, you know, food service, professional, and others, and we could probably add the elderly in there. Especially on your impact, it says that, you know, food service has been impacted twice as much as the other two. So I just wonder if there's any accommodation in that outside of just a wait list for preferences.
I didn't quite understand the
I
question.
think what's being asked is, could we expand the preferences to add one for maybe food service workers or the elderly? And I guess I'd be concerned about equal protection issues with singling out specific types of job classifications and also age classifications.
Cities many times have the list themselves. Cities many times are the ones who put the list together. In my experience, the city has the list, and then that's provided to, and in Avalon, in fact, that's what we did. And then the developer looked at that list, and if they found no one on that list then who was eligible, then they could open the list to other folks. But the party that did phase one was advertising all over California, and didn't even have the courtesy to respond. It was Stewart Company, I think it's called.
John Stewart Property.
Yeah, they were very, I would really appreciate them coming forward and have some conversation about that. But the city could have a list, I assume.
Right, so currently we have 8 different affordable housing properties within the city. Each one of those property management companies have their own wait list that they manage and that they go through. And so, like I referenced, and then Ms. Stroud also referenced, we'd have to enter agreements into each one of these property management partners and developers to go through that. And it's similar to what a lot of other jurisdictions, unless like housing authorities, they have their own wait list. There's a lot of other places we don't have a housing authority, so it looks a little bit different.
Actually, we do have a housing authority, we just don't use it in that way.
Mr. Robbins?
Yeah, just in fairness, I share Councilmember Jenkins's, frustration about the way this will probably not apply. This will basically not apply to. It didn't apply to phase one. That's in the past already understood, but it probably also won't apply to phase 2 or 3. It might apply to phase 4. I would like it to apply right away. That would certainly be my frustration. So I just want to express that I share that frustration. It's legitimate. It's an absolutely legit frustration. But it points to the question that I'm going to ask, which is, I wish this were happening 4 years ago. It would make that problem not be a problem. And so to that point, the Sugar Pines is kind of currently up for construction now. It's currently, in the dirt moving, well, it's winter now, but it's currently in otherwise the dirt moving phase. But on deck, probably in 4 years from now, we have the 3900 project. And my concern is if we don't do this now, it might not apply then. So I just want to clarify that the 3900 project, which is currently in its let's just say conceptual, super preliminary phases, that this local housing preference policy, I want to verify that this would apply to some yet unfully realized development that would take place in the 3900 block area that we've been talking about in the past.
Yeah, so for the 3900 Lake Tahoe Boulevard project, since it is in the pre-development phase, we have only a couple funding sources that have been provided for that project, but it's still open to negotiations in creating that agreement to implement the local preference policy.
So this would be kind of the situation here. Would it be a fair way to characterize it as like, we're kind of a little late to do this for Sugar Pines for the most part. We might get like the tail end of it. We're a little late for the most part for Sugar Pines, but there's other stuff on deck.
Yes, correct.
That we are hoping, it hasn't been fully financed, it hasn't been committed, but there's stuff we're hoping to get to in the future. And in the same way that I wish we would have done this 4 years ago, if we don't do it now, then 4 years from now, we're gonna be wishing we had done this now. So let's do this now.
Agreed. Thank you, Ms. Robbins. You have discussion? Okay, thank you. Is there any other clarifying questions for Ms. Wackenhut or Ms. Stroud or RSG? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to public comment. Is there any members of the public that would like to speak on this item? Mr. Gregorich.
Yeah, good evening. David Gregorich, speaking as a citizen of the city. I struggle with this one philosophically a little bit. My instinct is, I'm not sure we need this. My instinct is, what are you gaining by excluding the types of applicants that Ms. Lamelli listed? If they otherwise qualify, they're just as much in need of housing as any of the people included in the policy. They feel they're just as much of the greater community as anyone else that would be eligible under the policy. I'm thinking part of, the big motivation behind all our housing efforts is to make the housing situation here more navigable. And I don't know that that's what this does. More navigable. It's sort of like a tariff. It's building a tariff wall. It's adding another step to the process. It's making it more complicated. We're talking about losing jobs, losing population. If we're going to address that, I think that implies we want to increase jobs. We want a more vibrant community economy. We want to refill the schools. That implies you're adding people, not excluding. I recognize, you want to help existing people not be displaced. But there's sort of a different message also coming through here that it's making it more complicated. In all these housing, testimonies, you always hear, how do people become a member of the community? One of the big ways is somebody came here, they came skiing, they came on vacation. They fell in love with the place and said, I want to figure out how to stay here. So this policy, I understand some of the motivation behind it, but it's also kind of counterintuitive to that sentiment. So that's why I struggle with it. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gregorich. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak on this item? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to Zoom.
Yeah, we'll open up our Zoom platform. Mr. Mosier?
Can you hear me, Sue?
Yep, go ahead, Ed.
Okay, yes, Ed Moser. Yes, basically this argument, as a couple of people have mentioned, really should have occurred 5 to 6 years ago. but it didn't come up and nobody thought of it at the time. There were so many other things in the queue trying to get that built. So that's the first problem. You're dealing with the 3900 Lake Tahoe Boulevard project. Now you're ahead of the curve a bit, so you can start applying it to that. The second thing is the percentage of the city's contribution overall to this project. There's a large part of it is a loan, and it's a very minute percentage. So we really don't have that much say in it because we don't have that much of a stake in the project actually financially. And I believe that someone mentioned, if I'm not mistaken, it's been mentioned previously that since there is some state funding and grants, that prohibits from limiting it to locals only here, so that as long as the money's coming from the state, that you have to allow people from outside of the area if they want to live or reside there. So maybe get some clarification on that, because I think that was mentioned by someone previously. Thank you.
No additional public comments, Mayor.
Thank you. I'll bring it back to council. And I just thank you for mentioning 3900 Lake Tahoe Boulevard, because that's a big housing issue, housing potential. We also have the crossings between the old outlets and the Tahoe Valley Pharmacy property. There's Emerald Bay Road. These are all properties that are being looked at for affordable housing. They came from the Conservancy. So including the 10 acres that Sugar Pine Village is on. So we have a lot of housing in the pipeline that this could potentially impact in a positive way. I think that the fact that there's 90% locals that would fall under this preference already in Sugar Pine, that's a great thing. And I just want to make sure that we're not chasing the perfect and giving just for the good. The good is good. It's good.
The good be the enemy of the perfect.
Thank you. So, Mr. Bass.
Yeah, you really kind of covered exactly what I wanted to say, that the 90% that we've seen in this first 53 units is a good testament to kind of, I think, what hopefully we'll continue to see. I also share the frustration that, yeah, it would have been great to do this 4 years ago before we had financing agreements that didn't include this. And I can understand why once you've gone down the road, if you've ever had to deal with financing, it's not so we don't want to stall progress in Sugar Pine being complete. In my opinion, I don't feel that that's what we should do. Hopefully it will apply for the fourth phase. It probably will, because they can put it into the finance agreements. And then it's a tool for all future development for affordable housing. To me, it's really the right thing to do. And so, yeah. And so I would just be willing to throw out a motion, and I know you.
Let me do it. I would like to do the motion because I put this on I put this in.
No.
I put this on for, yeah, sorry.
Okay.
I'm eager to do this motion because this was one of the first items I brought.
Just going to do a motion, because
Yeah.
I'm ready to. No, I'm just kidding.
This was one of the first things I brought into council, actually.
It's great. No,
This
just-
was one of the things I did in my very first year.
So what was the motion?
What's the motion? Move on.
Are we all good?
We're all good.
Okay. I'm just going to say as read. That's all right. So I move to pass a resolution adopting the local tenant preference policy for affordable housing with the modifications as read by the city attorney.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. And I hesitate to ask, but is there further discussion? Oh,
You
just.
had to ask.
It's the rule.
If you did raise this 3 or 4 years ago, obviously it wasn't something that was looked at, even though cities in California.
2 years
2
ago.
years
So I've
ago,
only been on council
and
2.
other people have raised this issue before about a local preference and cited the city of Berkeley as an example. So.
But I was only on council 2 years ago to do it.
Well, okay. The point is that I was very much in favor of a local preference policy from the very beginning with Sugar Pine. And it just concerns me that we're telling the residents, the hardworking people at Ernie's and Bert's and other places, that they, who are struggling with housing payments, that they may not be eligible because the companies that are doing are reaching out to to people who don't even live here, maybe not even work here, if that's possible. And so I struggle with that. I know you said the perfect is the enemy of the good, and I'm just trying to weigh the good, and I don't know. It is frustrating.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Can we please vote?
Looks like we do it again.
That motion carries.
Okay, moving on to, I'm sorry, I put my stuff away.
You're not.
Yeah, thank you, the agenda planning calendar. Mr. Irvin.
Do you have to news about the ice hotspot stuff?
Agenda planning calendar. Agenda planning calendar. Let's try that again.
Yeah, that one.
All right.
Don't leave people, this is the most exciting item on the.
If I just want to point out to council, our next on the agenda planning calendar, if you look at February 11th, there is no item listed at this time. Everything our staff is working on is set to go on the 25th of February. So we'll see. Something could come up. We may have to have an agenda, but right now there's nothing on there.
That's really good news.
And it's the next meeting, so we can't put anything on there even if we wanted to.
Correct.
Okay, moving on to updates and announcements. Ms. Stroud.
None this time. Thank you, Mayor.
Ms. Blankenship.
None, Mayor.
Please feel better, Ms. Blankenship.
Thank you.
Mr. City Manager.
Yeah, two things. This Thursday, 9:30 a.m., our South Tahoe Transit JPA will be holding the first meeting. It's 9:30 here. Thursday. And then I don't want to steal the thunder from one of my, or the both council members, but I just appreciate the city allowing me to go with our new council members, Mr. Jenkins and
Agreed.
Mr. Keith Roberts on the new mayors and council members conference. So it was very beneficial.
Thank you, Mr. Irvin.
Hey,
Okay, moving on to council members. Mr. Roberts.
Mr. Roberts, I presume.
Nothing at this time, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins.
I too want to thank the city council for allowing the new members and city manager to go to the Cal Cities conference. It was excellent. It was good engagement, and in many ways we're doing many good things. A lot of people like us, and to the extent that we can, that goodwill, that we can use that goodwill to help us on matters that we deal with, I think that would be useful. One last thing. No, it won't go anywhere, but I still think that we need to know whether state law applies to the city on housing mandates, or are we a sub-agent, if you will, for housing to the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. I think that's very important because of the penalties, and I think I would hope that the Attorney General of the state issue, since if penalties are levied, it's against the organization and maybe of us personally. I would sure like to know. I mean, I think you might want to know, and our staff might want to know too. So that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Mr. Robbins?
Yeah, I represented the city at the last TRPA meeting, and, sorry, God, it's late. Hello, my name is Keith Roberts. It's a minute here. At the TTD meeting, and I think that, I can't remember if that was between the last city, I think that was between the last city council meeting and now, so. So I don't think I reported on it in the preceding. So, in short, Douglas County's representatives were very concerned about not being able to continue spending the California state money, and made that position exceedingly clear and surprisingly explicit, although surprising for me as the new person on that committee. I think there will be, in general, support ultimately for the JPA, but I just wanted to share what I observed. I was able to raise on a number of points, because that was our It was the TTD's strategic plan meeting was the last TTD meeting, so it's a sort of general topic meeting. And a major topic of discussion was what I had discussed at the joint City-County Board of Supervisors meeting, which was the operational costs of the TTD, both metric as per revenue mile and per revenue hour both, are more than double the costs of comparable agencies, particularly Mammoth Lakes, which is another California snow town, ski town, very similar in terms of economic and climatological environments. So I've received very little quality feedback from my engagements with the TTD. I don't have a lot of confidence that they seem to be really willing to engage on this. The board seemed interested in it, but the management seemed a lot less concerned by that than I am.
So they want us to pay.
Well, Douglas County certainly wants California money, but I just wanted to share my observations from the strategic plan meeting without trying to read too much into the mental state of everybody else. I'm just telling you what I observed.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that, Mr. Robbins. Mr. Bass.
Yeah, so I actually have also, since the last meeting, had a couple different meetings. Actually, I left this meeting early, our last council meeting, to go to a stakeholder meeting for the event center, which is, in my opinion, pretty critical right now for us to get the event center permit back in front of the TRPA board so that we can look at some of the things that maybe didn't make sense and aren't working, and we can start to look at maybe attendance caps rather than just day of time caps. There's a lot of things that we didn't know about the event center that we do know now, such as a hockey team that has taken up a lot of these days, and they're happening during the period of the year that's really our shoulder season. So I'm really hopeful that through this process we're going to get there. There's very kind of complex things around the monitoring that needs to take place and how we find a baseline and clarify those things, but I think it's going forward. There's, I think everybody has seen the event center has really been a great thing for the community, and we need to make it work going forward. So the TRPA had put a 3-year window on that, and I'm very hopeful that maybe we'll get there before that 3 years. And then I also went to a TRPA meeting last Wednesday that was about the Homewood approval. It was about 6.5 hours of public comment on both sides of the issue, and very complex around, the permits that are being issued for the gondola, as well as a new development that will happen in Tahoe around the Homewood base. Most of the people from the West Shore, from what I heard in public comment, want to see development, but they also want to see Homewood stay public. And of course, Homewood not opening this year has created a lot of issues for the economy on the West Shore. And so I voted no on one of the issues and voted 3 on the other. We had 4 total motions. I was stuck on some things about wanting to make sure it stays public, but I do trust that TRPA wrote the permit in the right sense to allow the enforcement efforts if we need to against Homewood, so that we can ensure that it stays public. So that's about it. It's been a busy couple of weeks, so I'm glad to hear we might have a break on the 11th.
Would be nice. I was able to attend both a badge pinning ceremony at the fire department, at the police department, and the fire department awards ceremony last night, and both just excellent. I also attended a countywide oversight board meeting, and that is for the leftovers on redevelopment, and that's just winding down, and Olga does such a great job with that for the group that is involved in that. And then I had a LAFCO meeting, and nothing really to apply to South Lake Tahoe. I believe at our next LAFCO meeting, though, in March, that the cleanup annexation will be on that agenda. So with that, we're going to adjourn.